Dungeon Reaper. A light novel by Bloodmoss. Chapter 1. The Last Delivery. The 1994 Geo Metro rattled like a toolbox tumbling down a flight of stairs on the uneven streets of Crystal Gate. The once quiet city had grown noisy and chaotic since the awakening phenomena began 5 years ago. Billboards advertised guild recruitment drives, promising fame and riches to those brave enough to face dungeons. Posters on street corners featured clean-cut adventurers posing heroically, weapons gleaming in exaggerated sunlight. A few signs boasted about guilds lucky enough to have alchemists, highlighting their ability to brew potions, an invaluable advantage in a world where healing was otherwise a slow and painful process. "Come on, Battle Wagon, you've got one more in you," Cain muttered, gripping the wheel tightly. The pizza boxes stacked precariously on the passenger seat slid to the side as the car lurched over a pothole. He reached out to steady them, his other hand barely keeping the car on course. He pulled up outside the Azure Fong Guild's HQ, a sleek office building that somehow managed to exude smugness. The guild emblem, a snarling black wolf, was etched into the glass doors, glowing faintly under the dim streetlights. Cain parked by the curb, the metro giving one final, pathetic wheeze as he turned off the engine. Rain drizzled steadily, pattering against the cracked windshield and pooling on the uneven street. With a resigned sigh, Cain reached over to the manual window crank. He turned it slowly, the mechanism creaking in protest as the glass slid down. Cold rain splattered onto his arm as he leaned out to grab the broken door handle from the outside. "Yeah, this is fine," he muttered, yanking the door open and stepping out into the drizzle. His shoes landed in a shallow puddle, soaking through instantly. Perfection. Balancing 2 pizza boxes, Cain trudged up the steps and entered the lobby. Inside, the air was cool and quiet, save for the chatter of adventurers lounging on modern leather couches. They radiated confidence in their reinforced gear, weapons propped casually nearby. "Delivery for Sarek," Cain announced to the room. A tall man in combat boots strode forward, flanked by a hulking dog that could only be described as unnervingly demonic. Its black fur gleamed, and its red eyes glowed faintly as it snarled at Cain. Sarek ignored the tension as he snatched the pizzas from Cain's hands. "Finally," he said, opening the first box and grabbing a slice. The second box he tossed onto the tiled floor. "Fenrir. Dinner." The dog lunged at the box, tearing it open with a growl. Grease splattered across the floor as bits of crust flew in every direction. "Seriously?" Cain said, glancing from the mess to Sarek. "You couldn't just put it in a bowl or something?" Sarek gave him a lazy smirk. "Fenrir likes it this way. Builds aggression." "Yeah, I'm sure that's what all the best dog trainers recommend," Cain muttered, taking a step back as the dog snapped up the last of the pizza. Sarek reached into his pocket and flicked a single coin at Cain. It hit his chest and clattered to the floor. "Here's your tip. Work harder, maybe you'll graduate to dungeons one day," Sarek said before turning away. Cain clenched his jaw, the coin feeling heavier than it should as he picked it up. The other adventurers barely acknowledged him as he left, the faint growling of Fenrir still audible behind him. Outside, the metro was still ticking from the heat of its overworked engine. As Cain slid back through the window and shoved the key into the ignition, a voice on the radio caught his attention. Another report about rising dungeon anomalies, the announcer's voice sharp and precise. And experts warn that collapse events are becoming more frequent, leaving many questioning the Dungeon Regulation and Oversight Bureau's ability to manage guild resources and enforce safety standards. Cain tightened his grip on the wheel, muttering under his breath. "Yeah, because Drob's precious safety regs are doing wonders for people like me. Gods forbid they let someone untested get a shot." Deep down, though, he knew the truth. His lack of experience wasn't their fault or the guild's. No one wanted to risk bringing a liability into a dungeon, especially with collapse events looming. But if they'd just let him start, let him prove himself, he could level up, train harder, be better. He could be someone. He sighed and pressed the accelerator, the metro sputtering in protest as the guild's glowing emblem disappeared in the rearview mirror. The studio apartment was as cramped and uninspiring as Cain's adventure rank. A single window leaked pale light from a nearby street lamp, illuminating the pile of unopened guild rejection letters on his tiny table. The room was sparsely decorated, mostly because he couldn't afford decorations, with a futon shoved against one wall and a lopsided shelf holding a sad collection of half-read dungeon guides. Cain sat cross-legged on the futon, his legs surrounded by papers, overdue bills, past-due notices, and the crown jewel of his financial misery, a nearly maxed-out second credit card. He stared at the neon orange, minimum payment required, warning as if sheer willpower might erase it. "Well, at least I'm consistent," he muttered, tossing the statement onto the growing pile. His aid chip HUD hovered just at the edge of his vision. He swiped it open with a practiced motion, revealing his stats. Dungeon Regulation and Oversight Bureau, DRB. Adventurer Registration Information Packet. Name: Cain Thorne, registered alias. Legal name: Keith Noland. Registration ID: DRB AF T15289017. Affiliation: Freelance Adventurer, unaligned. Rank: F tier, provisional. Attribute score: out of 100. Strength 10. Stamina 12. Speed 14. Mana 3. Performance record: no verified dungeon completions. Behavioral note: exhibits a tendency toward procrastination and overcompensation in social and professional scenarios. Employment status: currently unaffiliated with a guild or regulated adventure party. The last line might as well have been tattooed on his forehead. Pending review felt like the theme of his life. Cain groaned and flopped back onto the futon, staring at the cracked ceiling. "I left Pine Hollow for this?" he asked the universe, though it didn't seem inclined to answer. He thought he'd outgrown the flatline, its sleepy streets, low-magicked mundanity, and constant reminders that his awakening was barely enough to qualify for anything. But at least in Pine Hollow, he'd been something. A promising runner at school. The town's token, maybe he'll make it someday kid. Now, here he was, a failed adventurer living off pizza tips and chasing a dream that guild after guild had told him wasn't his to have. He picked up one of the unopened letters from the table and tore it open with a swipe of his finger. "Dear applicant," the letter began. "Thank you for your interest in the Stonehaven Explorers Guild." Unfortunately. Cain crumpled the paper before he could finish reading. "Unfortunately, my ass," he muttered, hurling it across the room. It hit the wall with an unimpressive thud and joined the pile of its predecessors in the corner. The truth stung more than the rejection letters. Guilds weren't rejecting him because of his lack of effort. They were rejecting him because he wasn't good enough, not yet, anyway. But how could he get good enough if no one would give him a chance? It was a maddening, unsolvable loop. His stomach growled, cutting through the self-pity. He reached over to his delivery bag, pulling out the single consolation prize of the day, a leftover slice of meat lovers, slightly cold and thoroughly depressing. "Breakfast of champions," Cain said, biting into the crust. It was chewy and tasteless, but it was free. The aid chip pinged faintly, drawing his attention back to the HUD. Beneath his unimpressive stats, a small notification blinked. Adventurer application, Hollow Blade Guild. Status: in review. Cain stared at it, the faintest spark of hope igniting in his chest. "They're still reviewing it," he said aloud, sitting up. He opened the application with trembling fingers, scanning the progress bar. It was almost too much to hope. If they approved him, even provisionally, he'd finally have a shot. His optimism lasted all of 3 seconds. The status changed. Status: denied. Cain threw himself back onto the futon and closed his eyes, letting the cold reality settle over him. Outside, the rain continued its steady rhythm, muffling the faint sounds of the city. "Tomorrow," he muttered to himself. "Tomorrow, someone's gonna see my potential. Right?" The Hollow Blade Guild's HQ was a far cry from the polished halls of the Azurefang. The paint peeled from its brick walls, and the neon sign above the door buzzed faintly, the O flickering intermittently. It sat wedged between a pawn shop and a dive bar, the kind of place that screamed low-tier adventurers welcome. Cain pulled up to the curb, carefully maneuvering the Geo Metro into a tight spot. The engine sputtered to a halt, coughing once as if insulted by the task. "Stay here and don't embarrass me," Cain muttered, patting the dashboard before grabbing the delivery bag. Inside, the guild hall was loud and chaotic. Adventurers argued across mismatched tables, their weapons clattering against the floor. A lone fan spun lazily overhead, barely cutting through the warm, stale air. The receptionist, a young woman who, despite her age, looked like she'd seen it all, didn't bother to glance up as Cain approached the counter. "Delivery for Hollow Blade," he said, hoisting the bag. Before the receptionist could respond, a voice rang out from across the room. "We're short one." Cain turned toward the commotion. Four adventurers stood near the far wall, their expressions ranging from frustration to outright panic. "We can't go in with just four," the woman in leather armor shouted, her voice rising above the din of the room. Her short blonde hair stuck up in wild spikes, a clear sign she'd been yanking at it in frustration. "DRB regs are clear, minimum 5 for an E-class run." To emphasize her point, or maybe just vent her fury, she turned and slammed her fist into the nearest wall. The concrete gave way with a loud crunch, leaving a fresh hole surrounded by older, faded ones. Dust rained down as the room fell briefly silent. Cain blinked, noting the sheer number of similar fist-sized craters decorating the room. Starting to see why this place looks like a condemned boxing ring, he muttered under his breath. "Doesn't matter," she barked, shaking the dust from her knuckles as she rounded on the stocky man beside her. "We need someone, or we lose the slot." Cain hesitated, his heart pounding. He could walk out, deliver the pizzas, and go home to his crumpled rejection letters. Or he could take the chance. "Hey," he called out, stepping forward. "I can do it. I'll fill the slot." Four sets of eyes turned toward him. "You," the scarred leader said, his tone dripping with disbelief. "Me," Cain said, straightening his back. "I've been between jobs, but I've got experience." The leader raised an eyebrow. "Aid stats. Now." Cain froze. Sure. 1 second." He swiped at the air, activating his aid chip, fumbling with the interface nervously. The glowing HUD flickered into view, and he struggled to make the "send stats" gesture. His finger slipped, and a notification popped up. "Broadcasting stats to local network." The room went silent for half a second, followed by a chorus of laughter. Even the receptionist let out a sharp snort, barely bothering to hide her amusement. "Seriously?" The teenage girl sat up from the desk, her grin wide and teasing. Her messy auburn hair and oversized leather jacket gave her a rebellious air, though the way she carried herself hinted at someone used to holding her own. She looked no older than 15, but her presence immediately demanded attention. "Wow," she said, mock admiration dripping from her tone as she scanned his stats again. "With numbers like these, you almost qualified to take my job as the paper pusher here. Wanna arm wrestle? I promise to go easy on you." Cain flushed, resisting the urge to shrink back. "Hard pass, kid," he muttered, adjusting his delivery bag on his shoulder. "Name's Penny," she said, crossing her arms and tilting her head. "And you're not getting out of this that easy. Come on, how about just 1 round? I'll even use my left hand." Before Cain could retort, a burly man stepped up behind her, resting a heavy hand on her shoulder. The resemblance was clear. This had to be her older brother, the tank of the group. He loomed over Cain, his armor clinking faintly as he leaned in. "Listen, delivery boy," he said in a low growl, "don't even think about holding my little sister's hand. To arm wrestle or otherwise." Penny rolled her eyes and elbowed him in the ribs. "Relax, big guy. Not everyone's dying to date me, you know." "Yeah, dying will be the issue here," her brother shot back, earning a few chuckles from the group. "Class F, that stands for fuck no. As in, No, you're not going with us, and definitely no, you're not touching my little sister. Cain gritted his teeth, holding his ground despite the heat rising in his face. Look, I know I'm not exactly what you want, he said, his voice louder than intended. But you need 5, and I'm here. Take it or leave it. The laughter subsided, and the group exchanged uneasy glances. Penny's grin faltered slightly as she glanced at her brother. The scarred leader sighed, running a hand down his face. Damn it, you all know what happens if we don't fill this slot? We lose the dungeon claim. That's money, reputation, and 3 months of work down the drain. Not to mention DRB breathing down our necks for wasting their time. He shot a glare at Penny, who shrugged unapologetically. You think they'll care that Bart bailed? No. They'll fine us anyway. We need 5, and he's the best we're gonna get right now. Fine, the blonde woman muttered. But don't touch anything. Last in, last out. You're carrying the gear. I'm not a porter, Cain protested. You are now, the leader snapped. Now shut it, load the gear, and move that piece of shit you're driving before someone thinks it's ours. Cain's mouth opened, then closed. He didn't argue. Instead, he jogged outside and shoved the metro into reverse, parking it a block down the street. By the time he returned, the adventurers were waiting by a battered van, their gear piled haphazardly on the curb. Suit up, we already submitted the paperwork, and if we leave now, we can be in and out before DRB can shut us down for even thinking about this insanity, the leader ordered, tossing Cain a worn leather jerkin. Cain had no gear. He wasn't ready for this opportunity, or any opportunity really. His adventure kit had been gathering dust since the last rejection letter, and he hadn't thought to bring it along with the pizzas. As he stood awkwardly by the van, debating how to explain his lack of preparation, a soft chime sounded in his head. His aid chip's HUD flickered to life, displaying a bright green notification. Application approval. Congratulations on becoming a member of the Hollow Blade Guild. Cain blinked at the words, his heart doing an awkward flip. Wait, seriously? He muttered. He stared at the message, half expecting it to vanish. The blonde woman glanced over, arching an eyebrow. What's the holdup, newbie? Cain quickly dismissed the notification, straightening up. Nothing. Just processing the fact that I'm officially a guild member now. She snorted. Don't get too excited. You're here because we're desperate, not because you're special. The scarred leader tossed a worn leather jerkin at him, its buckles frayed and straps mismatched. Here, borrow this. Try not to get it torn up or you're paying for it. Cain caught the jerkin awkwardly and nodded. Right. Thanks. Totally appreciate it. He slipped it on, trying not to gag at the mildew smell. Ready, he said, his voice cracking slightly. The blonde rolled her eyes. Sure you are, newbie. Let's just get this over with, and you're paying for the pizza. Chapter 2. The Ride to Glory. The rain drummed steadily against the van's roof, a rhythm that might have been soothing if the vehicle wasn't careening around corners like a roller coaster operated by a caffeine-addled squirrel. Cain gripped the edge of his seat, knuckles white, as the blonde woman behind the wheel laid on the horn again. Move it, you glorified speed bump, she barked at a sedan crawling through the intersection ahead. The van fishtailed slightly as she accelerated through a yellow light, prompting a sharp look from the man in the passenger seat. Serena, the tank grumbled, his voice low and gravelly. It's raining. And your point is, she shot back, glaring at him briefly before cutting off a delivery truck with a precision that could only come from years of reckless driving. Cain, wedged in the middle row, was already regretting his life choices. Again. Beside him, a pale man in loose robes nursed a cup of coffee, his bleary eyes barely open. The smell of cheap caffeine and stale alcohol wafted from him like an aura. You okay there, Doc? Cain asked, leaning slightly away. The man grunted, taking another sip. Define okay. Alive? Debatable. In the back of the van, the assassin lounged as though he were on a tropical vacation, one leg stretched across the seat, a dagger spinning lazily in his hand. He hadn't said a word since Cain got in but radiated an unsettling calm, as though he already knew how the day would end and found it amusing. Cain cleared his throat, glancing around the crowded vehicle. So, 6 people? I thought dungeon teams were 5. Good catch, genius, Penny said from the passenger seat's headrest, where she'd been hanging like a restless cat. She swung around to face him, her auburn hair bouncing as she smirked. I'm not going. Throb's got a thing about minors and dungeons. You're a minor? Cain asked, eyebrows raised. You're not, 12, are you? Penny's brother, the tank, Griffin, snapped his head around to glare at Cain, his eyes narrowing to predatory slits. Penny laughed, slapping her knee. Wow, bold move, newbie. I'm 19. 2 more years before I can officially get my face melted in a dungeon. For now, I'm just here for the paperwork and to make sure you don't screw it up too badly. Great, Cain muttered, slumping into his seat. A human clipboard. Exactly, Penny said cheerfully. Now, speaking of which, she unhooked herself from the headrest and clambered into the back row, pulling a tablet from her jacket. Let's get your deets in the system, rookie. As Penny tapped away on her device, Griffin growled something under his breath. The next thing Cain knew, the assassin, who had been enjoying his dagger-spinning zen, was unceremoniously shoved aside, replaced by a wall of armor and muscle. Griffin wedged himself into the seat beside Cain, so close their shoulders touched. Don't get comfortable, Griffin rumbled, his voice low enough to rattle bones. And don't talk to my sister. I'm not. You're not what? Griffin interrupted, looming over Cain like a thundercloud. Penny leaned forward, grin wide. Don't mind him. He gets twitchy whenever someone looks at me for more than 3 seconds. Ignore the size, he's basically a giant toddler. Shut up, Penny, Griffin snapped, but his ears turned red. Can I switch seats with someone? Cain asked, already knowing the answer. Nope, Penny said, popping the P. She shoved the tablet under his nose. Now, your address? Emergency contact? Blood type? Shoe size? Favorite pizza topping? Just kidding. Sort of. Is this necessary right now? Cain asked as he squirmed, trying to escape Griffin's looming presence. Penny's grin widened. Paperwork waits for no one. Cain sighed, glancing at the rain-streaked window, then at Griffin, who was still glowering at him menacingly. And neither does death. Griffin's eyes narrowed further before he let out a short, gravelly chuckle. You got that right, rookie. The van lurched again, throwing Cain forward as Serena narrowly avoided a pothole. From the front seat, she hollered, if anyone gets carsick, aim for the new guy. Cain sighed again, resigned. It was going to be a long ride. The rain had let up by the time the van skidded to a stop in front of the old church, but the air still carried the fresh, damp scent of a recent downpour. Cain pressed his face to the window, staring at the historic building. Its tall spire reached into the misty sky, its stone walls weathered by centuries, but still standing proud. A faint, otherworldly glow seeped through the cracks in the churchyard gate, illuminating the cobblestone path with an eerie blue light. A smattering of local journalists clustered near the gate, their cameras clicking half-heartedly. Most looked like they'd rather be anywhere else, probably lamenting that an E-rank dungeon was the highlight of their day. Cain didn't care. For him, this wasn't just another dungeon, it was the dungeon, his first real shot at becoming an adventurer. This is it, he muttered under his breath, heart pounding. His hands trembled slightly as he fumbled with the door handle. Griffin opened his door with a loud creak, shaking his head as if reading Cain's mind. Relax, rookie, Griffin grunted as he stepped out of the van, his boots splashing in a shallow puddle. Try not to look so excited. It's just a gate. Cain jumped out after him, nearly slipping on the wet cobblestones. Just a gate? This is my first dungeon. Do you know how long I've waited for this? Griffin grumbled something under his breath, but Serena cut in as she slammed the driver's side door shut. Yeah, big day for you. For us, it's just Tuesday. I'm serious, Cain said, his grin wide and genuine as he stared at the glowing portal. I've read every guide, watched every tutorial. I've got this. That's what they all say, Serena replied, smirking as she adjusted her daggers. Then we're scraping them off the floor halfway through. Penny hopped out last, yawning as she stretched her arms overhead. Try not to prove her right, newbie. Cleaning up after noobs is exhausting, and I am not filing another casualty report. Cain rolled his eyes, but his grin didn't falter. He couldn't bring himself to feel insulted, not when he was standing this close to a dungeon gate. The glow pulsed rhythmically, almost like a heartbeat, promising danger and adventure in equal measure. He stared at it, breathless. Focus up, Griffin barked, clapping his hands loudly. The team stopped milling around and turned toward him, their expressions sharpening. Cain hesitated before shuffling closer, wedging himself awkwardly between the assassin, who was still silent, and Doc, who looked like he might fall asleep standing up. What's happening? Cain whispered. Pre-run pep talk, Doc muttered, barely lifting his head. Just listen. Serena stepped forward, her usual smirk replaced by a rare, serious expression. She crossed her arms, her daggers glinting faintly in the rain-dappled light. We all should know, her gaze flicked pointedly to Cain, that even though thousands of gates have been closed worldwide, no one is exactly sure how they appear or why they appear. DRB assures us this is an E-class gate, but that's based solely on the size and the color. They could be wrong. The words hung heavy in the air, and for the first time, Cain noticed the subtle tension in everyone's posture. Even the assassin had stopped twirling his blade, his expression unreadable. Serena's voice softened, but her tone carried a weight that made Cain's chest tighten. They've been wrong before. Sometimes disastrously so. Be ready for anything. It might not be goblins and spiders waiting for us on the other side. It could be something worse. A chill ran down Cain's spine, but he stood a little straighter as Serena's gaze swept over the group. Stay together. Stay focused. Watch each other's backs. And most importantly, she locked eyes with Griffin for emphasis. If things go south, get the fuck out. No loot, no pride, no heroics. Just out. The group nodded, their somber expressions betraying no hesitation. Cain felt the weight of the moment pressing down on him. The reality of what he was walking into began to creep in, dulling the edge of his excitement. From behind him, Penny broke the silence with a snort. Good speech, boss. Inspirational, really. Serena rolled her eyes and turned back toward the gate, grabbing her gear without another word. Griffin hefted his shield and moved to follow her. Penny leaned casually against the van, clearly in no rush to join them. Don't worry, rookie. I'll be right here, cheering you on. And by cheering, I mean eating your cold pizza if you don't make it back. Cain smirked weakly, trying to muster his earlier enthusiasm. What makes you think I won't make it? Penny raised an eyebrow, her smirk returning. Optimism's cute, rookie. I'd give you 20 minutes tops. 25, Serena called from the gate, smirking. If he hides behind Griffin. Can we not do this in front of the gate? Griffin rumbled, hefting his massive shield. Let's move. The others began filing toward the gate, and Cain took a deep breath, gripping the straps of his overstuffed bags. His earlier excitement warred with the creeping unease in his gut. Stay together. Stay focused, he muttered under his breath, repeating Serena's words as he followed the others toward the swirling light. His shoulders sagged under the weight of the 2 overstuffed supply bags strapped across his back. The straps dug into his shoulders with each shift of his posture, and the 3 empty loot bags hanging from his hands swung precariously with every step. He already felt like a pack mule, and they hadn't even entered the dungeon yet. Why do I have to carry all this? Cain grumbled, adjusting the straps for the 3rd time. Newbie tax, Serena said without missing a beat as she tightened her bracers. You carry the gear, we carry you. Fair trade. Fair trade, Mage. Cain bit his tongue when Griffin shot him a warning glance, his shield slung casually across his back. The big man could probably carry everything Cain had, and then some, without breaking a sweat. Doc yawned, sipping from a small flask before tucking it into his robes. He looked at Cain with half-lidded eyes. Think of it as training. Builds character. Or breaks your spine. One of the two. Cain muttered something under his breath, earning a chuckle from the assassin, who had already begun idly sharpening a blade. At the front of the group, Serena paced toward the glowing portal, checking the straps on her twin daggers. You've got about 30 seconds to stop whining, rookie. Once we're in there, you'd better keep up. The gate stood just ahead, its swirling energy casting a bluish hue on the wet cobblestones. The faint whispers emanating from the portal seemed to grow louder as the group approached, an eerie, almost melodic sound that made Cain's skin prickle. He tried to suppress the shiver running down his spine, but the ominous glow didn't help. Each member of the team took their turn stepping through the portal. Serena went first, her confident stride never faltering as she vanished into the swirling vortex. Griffin followed, his shield held ready as if expecting something to leap out. Doc shuffled in next, still looking like he was on the verge of a nap, and the assassin moved with a quiet, almost predatory grace, as though he didn't trust the portal not to bite him on the way in. Then it was Cain's turn. He stood there for a moment, staring into the glowing blue depths. Up close, the whisper seemed louder, forming words he couldn't quite make out. The light danced and flickered, almost alive, and he could feel the faint hum of its energy vibrating in his chest. This was it. The culmination of everything he had worked for. Every rejection letter, every dead-end job, every sneer and condescending glance from guild recruiters had led him here. The doubt that had haunted him for so long wavered, just for a moment, as a flicker of pride crept in. He'd made it. Finally. Cain gripped the straps of his bags tightly, taking a deep breath. Okay, he muttered. No turning back. From behind him, Penny's voice cut through the moment. Any day now, rookie. You're holding up the line. Cain grinned, the tension breaking just slightly. He glanced back at her, still leaning casually against the van. See you on the other side. Don't die too quickly, Penny replied, smirking. Remember, you've got 20 minutes. With one last glance at the swirling gate, Cain squared his shoulders and stepped forward. The whispers grew into a crescendo as the light engulfed him, and then everything went silent. The moment Cain stepped through the glowing gate, he felt his breath leave him. The air changed thicker, charged with energy that pressed against his chest like an invisible hand. Then, everything went wrong. Light exploded from the ground beneath him, a column of fire that swallowed him whole. Pain shot through his body, sharp and searing, as a bolt of lightning cracked from above, slamming into his chest and tearing through muscle and bone. He didn't even have time to process the agony before something else, a flash of metal, sliced through his waist with horrifying precision. There was a split second of silence as his body gave way, and the world tilted sharply. The next thing he knew, he was flying backward, his vision spinning. His upper half hit the cobblestones with a sickening thud, the impact rattling through what remained of him. He lay on his back, staring up at the rain-soaked sky. His vision flickered, shadows dancing at the edges as droplets pattered on his face. Somewhere near the portal, lightning crackled, the arc snapping wildly as the gate stabilized, its energy pulsing with an almost sinister rhythm. Blood pooled quickly beneath him, its warmth seeping into the cobblestones as steam rose into the cold air. He didn't need to look down to know his lower half was gone, the searing emptiness told him enough. The smell of charred flesh and iron filled his nose, mingling with the dampness of the rain. He tried to move, to reach out, but his arms felt like lead. A sound cut through the haze, a scream, raw and desperate. Cain. The voice was familiar, sharp and fierce even in its panic. Penny. He couldn't see her, but he could hear her, each word punching through the growing fog in his mind. Let me go. He might still. There was a struggle, boots scraping on stone, muted shouts. Cain imagined her trying to run toward him, arms flailing, fighting off whatever was holding her back. Her voice cracked, rising in pitch. He might still be alive. The desperation in her words twisted something deep in his chest. He wanted to call out, to reassure her, to tell her it was okay. but his lips barely moved and no sound came. The world around him grew dimmer, colors bleeding into one another like an unfocused painting. The pain began to fade, not because it was gone, but because he was. Cain's head lolled to the side, rain dripping into his eyes as he caught sight of the gate. It pulsed faintly, almost content, like it had claimed its due. He couldn't even bring himself to hate it. Somewhere behind him, Penny's voice grew quieter, muffled by the roar in his ears. He imagined her face, angry, tear-streaked, fighting as hard as he'd tried to. Guess. I made it inside, he thought, a weak smile tugging at the corner of his lips. Kind of. The rain felt oddly soothing now, the cool drops washing away the heat and the blood. His vision narrowed to a single point of light, flickering like a distant star. And then, there was nothing. Chapter 3. Welcome to the Other Side. Cain's first sensation was cold, not the icy sting of winter, but a deep, hollow chill that crept into his bones. His eyes blinked open to a world devoid of vibrance. The familiar streets of Crystal Gate stretched before him, but the colors were washed out, muted as if someone had drained the life from the city. The air was still. Too still. No sounds of traffic, no murmurs of life, nothing but the faint echo of his own breathing. He sat up, his hands brushing against damp pavement. "What the hell?" he muttered, his voice sounding too loud in the oppressive silence. A sharp, rhythmic clack of heels broke the oppressive silence. Cain turned toward the sound and saw her, a towering figure cutting through the muted gray like a force of nature. She was built solid, with the kind of frame that promised she didn't need backup, and a look on her face that said she dared anyone to test her. Her black suit jacket strained slightly at the shoulders, the sleeves rolled up to reveal strong, no-nonsense arms. A clipboard dangled loosely in one hand, and her sharp, assessing gaze pinned him in place as if she'd already decided he wasn't worth the trouble. "You're up," she said, not slowing her stride. "Took your sweet time." Cain staggered to his feet. Who are you?" The woman stopped a few feet away, giving him a once-over with eyes that seemed to weigh and measure every flaw. "Shaniqua Miller. Your new supervisor. And you must be Keith Noland." She checked her clipboard, then gave a satisfied nod. "Yep. You're the poor bastard that lost his ass in the dungeon." "It's Cain," he said reflexively. Shaniqua raised an eyebrow, looking up from her clipboard. "Oh, you think your little name change trumps the paperwork? Let me clue you in, sunshine. This clipboard? Rules of the universe. Your feelings? Not even a footnote. Now, can we move on, or are you gonna cry about it?" Cain opened his mouth, closed it, and finally managed, "What's going on here? Where am I?" She gestured around them. "Welcome to the in-between. It's like Crystal Gate but shittier. No people, no noise, no bugs. Honestly, the no bugs part is a plus. But you? You're dead." His heart stopped, then started again, faster this time. "Wait, dead? That doesn't make any sense. I'm standing here talking to you." Shaniqua rolled her eyes. "And yet, here we are. You're dead, Keith. And now, you're on death's peril. Congrats, you've been promoted to eternal grunt work." "What?" "Listen," she said, her tone somewhere between exasperation and pity. "Death's been doing his thing for millennia. Collect souls, yada yada yada, move on. Then dungeons started popping up and screwing with his system. Now souls get stuck in those hellholes and Death's jurisdiction doesn't reach. So he needed a workaround." Cain blinked, completely uncomprehensive. And you're the workaround." She gestured at him with the clipboard. "Look, you died ass first into a dungeon gate. That makes you a certain kind of special. Welcome to the team." "This is insane," he said, shaking his head. She shrugged. "Most people don't ask to die. Life's unfair, death's worse. Now, shut up and follow me. I don't have time for your existential crisis." He stood there, frozen, as she started walking away. "Aren't I supposed to just go to heaven or something?" Shaniqua stopped, turning to look at him with a bemused expression. Oh, that's adorable. You think heaven's an option, isn't it? Beats the hell out of me. Haven't seen a shred of evidence it exists, and I've been doing this for a hot minute. She raised her voice and addressed the empty city. Anyone here know about heaven? No? Didn't think so. Now get your ass in gear before I leave you here to figure it out yourself. Spoiler, you won't. She resumed walking, and after a long moment, Cain followed. As he caught up, he muttered, "This can't be real." Shaniqua glanced at him, smirking. You keep telling yourself that, Keith. Let me know how it works out. Her heels clacked against the pavement as the lifeless city stretched before them. Cain jogged a few steps to catch up with Shaniqua, her unfaltering stride not matching her hefty physique. She seemed as unrelenting as the muted city loomed around them. The streets were hauntingly familiar, but everything was off. Puddles scattered across the pavement seemed frozen mid-ripple, their surfaces unnaturally smooth. Streetlights cast weak, grayish beams that barely penetrated the haze. The air hung heavy and unmoving, suffocating in its stillness. Cain glanced at the towering skyscrapers, their windows dark, reflecting faint, distorted versions of himself and Shaniqua. He shivered despite the absence of any wind. So this is the afterlife, he said, his voice subdued. She snorted. Not quite. Think of it as the lobby. You're here, 'cause you're not ready for the big leagues yet. Death's got plans for you. Plans? Like what? She arched an eyebrow. When dumbass like you die in those dungeons, you think death just waltzes in and picks up your soul like it's an Amazon package. Newsflash, he can't. Cain blinked. Why not? Because those damn dungeons aren't part of his jurisdiction. They're different. Multidimensional, unstable. The usual rules don't apply, which means those souls stay stuck, making a mess of things. She waved her clipboard for emphasis. That's where Dungeon Reapers come in. Dungeon Reapers? Cain asked, narrowing his eyes. Shaniqua resumed walking, her heels clicking on the pavement. Yep, death needed a workaround, so he started recruiting poor bastards like you who die right at the gate. Congrats, Keith. You're the solution. Cain hurried after her, his thoughts spinning. Wait. So you're telling me I'm supposed to, go into dungeons and collect souls for death? Like, I'm the Grim Reaper. He couldn't keep the excitement out of his voice. For a moment, visions of cloaked figures and scythes danced in his mind. Do I get a cloak? Or one of those cool scythes? Please tell me there's a scythe. Shaniqua stopped so abruptly he nearly ran into her. She turned, fixing him with a flat, unimpressed stare. Okay, let's get one thing straight, sunshine. You're not the Grim Reaper. You're a Reaper. And no, you're not getting a scythe. You're getting a clipboard and a pile of regret. Cain blinked. But. No buts, she cut him off, jabbing a finger at his chest. This isn't some badass, cloak-swirling, soul-harvesting gig. You're not swooping in on a black horse to reap the unworthy. You're a glorified janitor cleaning up the mess death can't reach. You get in, grab the souls, and get out. No capes, no theatrics, and sure as hell no scythe. Got it? Cain deflated, his excitement fizzling out like a popped balloon. Oh! Shaniqua smirked. Good. Welcome to the afterlife, Keith. We crush dreams for a living. Cain hesitated, the weight of her words pressing down on him. This is a lot. Yeah, and we're just getting started, Shaniqua said, her voice dripping with false cheer. She gestured at the empty street ahead. Now shut up and keep moving. We're almost there. A small cafe was tucked between two faded office buildings, the kind of place you'd miss if you blinked. Its peeling sign, Cafe Afterlife, swayed gently in a non-existent breeze, the letters barely clinging to their rusting mounts. Shaniqua stopped in front of the door, her clipboard tucked under her arm. All right, Keith, welcome to HQ. Cain squinted at the sign. This is where you work? A dead cafe? Pun intended. Shaniqua smirked. Cute. Don't let the decor fool you. This place is where the magic happens. And by magic, I mean bureaucracy. She shoved the door open, the faint chime of a bell echoing in the empty street. Inside, the cafe was even less impressive. The furniture was mismatched and well-worn, the walls of faded beige that might once have been cheerful but now looked like disappointment incarnate. The smell of stale coffee lingered in the air. The cafe's interior was dimly lit, the air thick with the scent of stale coffee and something faintly metallic. The mismatched furniture gave the room a cluttered, lived-in feel, as if it had been assembled from the leftovers of countless garage sales. Near the window sat a wiry man with sharp features and circular wire-rimmed glasses perched on his nose. He flipped a page of his newspaper without looking up. "You're into this, aren't you?" Edgar asked, his tone flat but faintly amused. Cain blinked. "Into what?" "This." Edgar gestured at the room, then at Cain. "You're not freaking out. You're practically giddy. Most folks take this a little harder." Maria snickered, twirling her pen. "Compared to Tobias, you're practically a cheerleader." Tobias shot her a look over his coffee mug. "I was adjusting. Not everyone gets excited about dying." Cain frowned. "Hey, I'm standing right here." "Exactly," Edgar said, turning back to his paper. "That's what makes it weird." "Maybe he hasn't processed it yet," Maria offered, grinning. "You know, give him 5 minutes to panic." Cain frowned. "Hey, I'm right here, you know." "Exactly," Edgar replied, turning back to his paper. "That's what makes it weird." Shaniqua stepped past Cain, slapping her clipboard onto the counter with a resounding thwack. "All right, knock it off," she said, glaring at the group. "Heath here's just enthusiastic because he doesn't know how deep the shit pile is yet. Let him have his moment." "Thanks. I think," Cain muttered. Shaniqua stepped past him, her heels clicking against the floor as she slapped her clipboard onto the counter. "Keith, meet the peanut gallery. Edgar's the brain, Maria's the optimist, and Tobias." She trailed off, gesturing vaguely at the bearded giant. "Well, he's Tobias." "Charmed," Edgar muttered, his eyes never leaving his paper. Cain sat down cautiously, his gaze shifting between them. "So, you're all Dungeon Reapers?" Maria looked up, smirking. What gave it away? The dead eyes or the complete lack of enthusiasm for life? Tobias chuckled. "You get used to it. Eventually. Or you don't. Either way, it's not our problem." Shaniqua dropped a massive stack of papers in front of Cain with a heavy thud. "Here's the deal. Terms and regulations. Standard stuff. Eternity or until death says you're done. No dental, no 401k, but you do get this fine company." "You're kidding, right?" Cain asked seriously, blinking at the stack. "Do I look like I'm kidding?" She shot back, arching an eyebrow. "Kind of," he muttered. "I mean, this is ridiculous." Edgar folded his newspaper neatly, finally meeting Cain's eyes. "The way I see it, you're already dead. So, what's a little paperwork? It's not like you're busy." "Thanks," Cain said dryly. "Super helpful." Tobias leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table. "Look, kid, it takes a special kind of acceptance to do this job, and a special kind of stupid to qualify. Lucky for you, you've got both." "Is sarcasm part of the job description?" Cain asked, glaring at Shaniqua. "It's not official," Shaniqua said, smirking. "It just comes with the territory. Now, start signing. I've got better things to do than babysit." Cain stared down at the towering stack of paperwork in front of him. It felt heavier than it had any right to be, and each page was dense with terms he was sure he'd never understand. "You'd think the afterlife would be simpler," he muttered, picking up the pen. Shaniqua smirked from across the table. "Kid, you're dealing with death. You expected cloud fluff and harp music? This is a bigger bureaucracy than life. Now sign." Maria leaned in from her seat nearby, sipping a chipped mug of coffee. "Don't overthink it, newbie. None of us read it either. Just the standard eternal servitude stuff." "Yeah," Tobias added with a grin. "And no refunds. If you're looking for a customer service line, you're out of luck." Cain rolled his eyes and began signing the first page. "Fantastic. I'm so glad my eternal soul is in good hands." "Speaking of souls," Edgar said, folding his newspaper. You know this body's just a stand-in, right? Placeholder until the real one's ready. Cain paused mid-signature. Great. Afterlife on a budget. Shaniqua smirked. It's not about style, Keith. Placeholder's temporary, tied to your soul. The real body? That's coming next. Shaniqua leaned back, smirking. You think I'd pick this look on purpose? She gestured at herself. Middle-aged, 250-pound black woman? Nah. Edgar's eyes lit up, his tone dripping with lechery. And yet, here you are. Strong, smart, voluptuous. Maria groaned, tossing her pen onto the table. Kiss ass. Perv, Tobias said without looking up. Shaniqua turned her glare on Edgar. You couldn't handle this ass when you were breathing, and you sure as hell can't handle it now. Edgar grinned. Sounds like a challenge. Okay, so there's also no HR in the afterlife. Got it, Cain cut in, pinching the bridge of his nose. Then why do you look like this? Here? Now? If you have a new body, I mean. Edgar shot in, this place isn't real either. This is a projection of the real world, and we get summoned here sometimes when things are going on. When you're in between, you look like this. Maria continued for Edgar, team meetings, apocalyptic scenarios, birthday parties. We never know until we get here and find out. Tobias shrugged. We know that you get one shot. Once you're in your Reaper body, your soul's tied to it. Lose the body, lose the soul. And trust me, kid, if that happens, your Reaper days are over. Permanently. Maria's voice softened slightly. And after that, well, none of us really know. Nobody's seen anything resembling heaven or hell. Just a lot of nothing. Cain looked up, his stomach sinking. Nothing? That's all there is. For a moment, silence settled over the table. Tobias finally broke it, his voice low. Yeah, kid, that's all anyone's got. Shaniqua clapped her hands sharply, shattering the moment. And that's more than enough. Now, eyes forward, Keith. You've got a job now, and I've got better things to do than babysit your existential crisis. Cain finished the last signature and pushed the stack of papers away with a sigh of relief. That's it, right? I'm officially a Reaper now. Not yet, Shaniqua said, grabbing the forms. First, we gotta make you presentable. She stood and motioned for him to follow her. He hesitated, glancing at the others. Maria gave him an encouraging smile. Don't worry, newbie. This is the fun part. The group shared a chuckle as Cain trailed after Shaniqua toward the back room. The change in atmosphere was immediate. A sleek, futuristic console in the dimly lit room pulsed faintly with energy, casting a cool blue glow across the metallic walls. Cain took a step forward, his eyes widening. What is this? Shaniqua tapped a few buttons, bringing a spinning hologram of Cain's current form into view. This is your body's blueprint. We're gonna rebuild you from scratch, make you fit for duty. Cain swallowed hard, the weight of her words settling in. So, what now? Maria's voice echoed from the doorway, cheerful as ever. Now you pick your upgrades. It's like designing your own superhero. Tobias groaned. Don't encourage him, Maria. He's already got that wide-eyed idiot look. Keep it practical, Keith. It's Cain, he corrected absent-mindedly, staring at the hologram. Whatever, Shaniqua muttered. You want taller, faster, stronger? Go nuts. But remember, you only get one shot at this. Cain hesitated, the flickering hologram holding his gaze. So this is it, huh? My new life. Shaniqua crossed her arms, her smirk fading to a razor-thin line. This is your shot, Keith. Get it wrong, and it's game over, for real this time. She motioned to the others as she stepped back. Let him sweat it out. Nothing like a little pressure to bring out the best. Maria chuckled, her voice fading as she left. Don't blow it, newbie. Chapter 4. Shaping the Reaper. The room hummed with a faint, mechanical buzz, its sleek metallic walls reflecting the soft blue glow of the console. Cain stood motionless, staring at the blank holographic figure projected before him. It rotated slowly, a translucent, featureless outline waiting to be shaped. He rubbed his hands together, his lips curving into a nervous grin. Okay, Cain, this is it. Time to build a legend. His voice echoed slightly in the quiet room, breaking the oppressive silence. The console blinked, and a cascade of options unfolded before him, each one accompanied by a brief description and an intimidating list of stats. Whoa, he muttered, scrolling through the list with wide eyes. There's a lot here. Hours passed as Cain plunged into this seemingly endless catalog of abilities. Each new power was accompanied by a short holographic demonstration, and he ran through mental simulations, trying to picture how they'd play out in the chaos of a dungeon. He began jotting notes on a virtual pad, organizing them into categories: offense, defense, and utility. Cain watched the hologram morph into stone, its skin hardening into an impenetrable shell. The skill was called material mimicry, and it looked extreme. Okay, tanking hits? Awesome. Metal fists? Also awesome. He scratched his chin, imagining the possibilities. But then the image shifted in his mind, a marshmallow, thrown in jest, sticking to his arm. What happens when someone lobs a s'more at me? Do I just melt into goo? The thought sent a shiver down his spine. Yeah, no. Hard pass. The next ability showed a figure dissolving into darkness, blending seamlessly with the shadows. Cain leaned in, intrigued. Creepy, stealthy, very Reaper-esque. He could already picture himself lurking unseen in the corners of a dungeon. But then another thought surfaced. What happens when the boss monster has night vision? The image of glowing red eyes peering into his hiding spot wiped the grin off his face. Nope, not risking it. The process was slow and deliberate. Every ability he discarded left him feeling like he'd missed something critical. Cain leaned against the console, letting out a heavy sigh. This is harder than I thought. His first breakthrough came hours later when he stumbled upon ethereal transference. The hologram demonstrated a figure becoming translucent, slipping through a wall and dodging an attack. Cain's eyes lit up. Now this, he said, tapping the description, this is exactly what a Grim Reaper would do. Phase in, phase out, like death itself. He put a star by that one in his notes and moved on. Cain's brow furrowed as the hologram showed the next interesting skill. The figure let out an ear-piercing scream, sending enemies sprawling in all directions. Okay, that's definitely disorienting, he muttered, his lips curling into a faint smirk. But the smirk quickly faded as he imagined the scene, him standing in a dungeon, shrieking at goblins. Screaming like a haunted air horn isn't exactly the Grim Reaper aesthetic I'm going for. He shook his head. Cool, but not my vibe. Next came Draining Grasp, an ability that sapped the strength of enemies upon contact. As the hologram showed a spectral hand weakening a foe, Cain imagined it paired with ethereal transference. Get in, drain them, get out. He grinned. I could steal their strength and leave them stumbling around like drunk toddlers. Perfect. He paused on spectral chains, watching as a holographic figure restrained enemies with ghostly bindings. Okay, so I chain them up, then what? If they're strong enough, they'll just break out. He imagined himself in a dungeon surrounded by goblins, all laughing as they snapped the chains like twigs. Yeah, no thanks. Another ability caught his attention, Spiteful Rebirth, which allowed a one-time resurrection in a blaze of vengeance. Cool. But the point here is not to die in the first place. He scratched it off his list. And then, the centerpiece to his entire concept flashed before him, Spirit Blade. The hologram shimmered, revealing a glowing weapon that shifted effortlessly between a sword, a hammer, and, finally, a scythe. Cain's brain twitched. There it is, he whispered, his eyes locked on the scythe. The granddaddy of Grim Reaper abilities. I'm not just going to reap souls. I'm going to look badass doing it. But it wasn't just the weapon's versatility that caught his attention. A notation glowed faintly beneath the description, enhances compatible abilities when wielded. Cain leaned forward, heart racing. He imagined the possibilities. The console chimed softly, indicating the choices were saved, but Cain lingered. The blank holographic figure had taken on a faint outline of his selections, and he stared at it, lost in thought. Memories of rejection and humiliation flickered in his mind. Guild leaders shaking their heads, snickering adventurers, the sting of realizing he'd never measure up. "Not this time," he said quietly. His fists clenched as he straightened his back. "This time, they'll remember me." Cain straightened in his chair, snapping out of the epic battle raging in his imagination. The thunderous clash of his spectral scythe cutting down hordes of monsters faded as reality reasserted itself. The click, click, click of high heels echoed through the room, unmistakable and foreboding. He didn't need to look to know exactly who had just walked in. Shaniqua strode into the room, clipboard in hand, her sharp gaze flicking from the hologram to Cain with the precision of someone taking inventory. She let out a low whistle. "Look at you, Keith. All dressed up with nowhere to reap." "It's Cain," he muttered automatically, though his confidence wavered under her scrutiny. Sure it is," she said, stepping up to the console. With a few quick taps, she brought up his chosen abilities. Ethereal transference, draining grasp, spirit blade. Cute. You do realize these are rank E abilities, right? You're barely out of the kiddie pool. Cain bristled, sitting up straighter. "I know what I'm doing." "Do you?" Shaniqua shot back, her eyebrow arching with practiced skepticism. "Because right now, it looks like you're setting yourself up for a lot of flashy moves with no follow-through. Just remember, utility wins dungeons, not drama." She gave him one last glance, her expression unreadable, before turning toward the door. "Don't take too long. We've got work to do." He watched as the hologram shimmered, waiting for the door to close behind the supervisor. Cain took a deep breath and leaned forward in the desk chair, a flicker of excitement in his eyes. "Let's finish this." The glow of the console bathed the room in cool blue light as Cain stared at the blank hologram. A featureless figure rotated lazily, waiting for his input. The sheer number of options stretched before him like a buffet of identity, each slider and toggle practically begging to be adjusted. "Okay," he muttered to himself. "Let's start simple." His eyes scanned the height slider first, pushing it up until the figure became comically lanky. "Too much," he mumbled, dialing it back to something that teetered on the edge of imposing. Tall enough to intimidate, but not, like, basketball player tall. Got it. Next, his attention shifted to the muscle definition. He cranked it up just to see the results. The hologram ballooned into a hulking mass of sinew and veins. "Holy crap," Cain said, stifling a laugh. "I look like I should be bench pressing cars." With a few quick swipes, he reduced the bulk until the figure settled into something lean and wiry. "Yeah, that's better. Strength without the steroid vibes." The gender option caught his eye, and with a curious tap, the figure shifted into a feminine form. He tilted his head, considering it. I could," he said aloud, his voice trailing off. A few seconds passed before he shook his head firmly. "Nah, that's a can of worms I'm not opening today." As the figure reverted back to male, his eyes wandered lower, narrowing on a particularly delicate slider. He hesitated, then adjusted it experimentally. The hologram shifted accordingly, prompting him to grimace. "Okay, that's just impractical," he muttered, dragging the slider back down. After a moment's thought, he nudged it slightly higher. Average, maybe a little above average. But only a little. Moving on, Cain browsed through the more cosmetic options. A glowing eyes toggle caught his attention, offering an array of colors and effects. He tapped through fiery reds, eerie greens, and icy whites, picturing himself in each. "Cool," he mused, "but it's giving major try-hard energy." He turned the glow off, opting for deep, shadowy black. Subtle. Creepy. Perfect. His fingers hovered over the hair options next. Long, short, spiky, the choices were endless. He selected long black hair, letting it cascade down the hologram's back like an ethereal curtain. "Yeah," he said with a nod, "this works. Classic. Timeless." As the figure began to take shape, he stepped back to take it all in. Tall, gaunt, and hauntingly skeletal, the hologram exuded an aura of inevitability. It was the embodiment of his vision, the shadow that loomed at the end of every path. Cain crossed his arms, a small smile creeping onto his face. Big boss man, he muttered, glancing upward. If you're watching, I just want you to know this is out of respect. You nailed the whole Grim Reaper thing. I'm just borrowing the aesthetic. He chuckled softly. I hope I'm doing it justice. The console let out a cheerful chime as Cain pressed the confirm button, and he leaned back with a satisfied grin. But instead of locking in his choices, a bright red alert popped up on the holographic display. Supervisory confirmation required. Bright red alert popped up on the holographic display. Cain groaned. Of course. Nothing's ever easy, is it? Before he could grumble further, the door hissed open. Shaniqua entered first, clipboard in hand, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. Maria followed, her expression already alight with amusement, while Tobias trudged in with his ever-present mug of coffee. Edgar brought up the rear, his glasses catching the blue glow of the console. All right, Keith, Shaniqua said, her tone brisk. Let's see what mess you've cooked up for us. It's Cain, he muttered, though his voice lacked conviction. Maria sauntered over to the console, her eyes scanning the holographic projection. A slow grin spread across her face. Tall, gaunt, and spooky. Classic. But where's the fun stuff? No glowing eyes? No ghostly aura? Missed opportunity. Tobias leaned over her shoulder, his mug in hand. And a scythe. Because of course there's a scythe. He turned to Cain, raising an eyebrow. You know you're not actually the Grim Reaper, right? You're a Reaper. Big difference. Cain crossed his arms, bristling under the scrutiny. It's not about being the Grim Reaper. It's about the vibe. The aura. The intimidation factor. Tobias said, unimpressed. And when that vibe gets you in trouble, what's your backup plan? Guys, give him a break, Maria cut in, though her tone was far from serious. She pointed at the hologram. At least he's consistent. Death incarnate and all that. I mean, he's probably going to face Splant in his first fight, but hey, he'll look cool doing it. Edgar finally stepped forward, his gaze sweeping across the projection with clinical detachment. Ethereal transference, draining grasp, spirit blade, he said, his voice neutral. Flashy, but there's potential synergy. If he can execute. Cain perked up slightly. Was that a compliment? Don't get used to it, Edgar replied, pushing his glasses up the bridge of his nose. Shaniqua stepped up last, her sharp eyes narrowing as she tapped through Cain's selections. Ranky abilities. Bare-bones stats. Flashy moves with no margin for error. She shot Cain a pointed look. You do realize these aren't just toys, right? If you screw this up, it's your soul on the line. I know what I'm doing, Cain replied, though the words came out more defensive than confident. Shaniqua's smirk returned, faint but cutting. We'll see. She tapped her clipboard, and the alert on the console vanished with a quiet beep. Choices confirmed. Congrats, Keith. You're officially the new kid on the block. Cain straightened, feeling a flicker of pride despite the teasing. Maria clapped him on the shoulder. Good luck, newbie. Don't let the goblins write your obituary. Tobias grunted as he turned to leave. I give it a week. The tension in the room had shifted to something quieter after Shaniqua confirmed Cain's choices. The hologram faded into nothingness, and she turned to face the group, her clipboard tucked under her arm. All right, she began, her tone brisk. Tobias, you're his entry-level liaison. Walk him through his first mission and make sure he doesn't embarrass us or worse, himself. Tobias groaned, rubbing the bridge of his nose. Babysitting duty? Really? Unless you want to double up on rank E dungeons, Shaniqua shot back. Your call. Tobias grumbled under his breath but didn't argue further. And Maria, Shaniqua continued, fill him in on the current wage stipend so he doesn't walk into this thinking there's a paycheck waiting. Maria straightened, her grin as sharp as ever. Oh, absolutely. She turned to Cain with mock sincerity. So here's the deal, newbie. Every Reaper receives a generous wage stipend. Enough to keep you comfortable, maybe even save for the finer things in life. Cain's eyes widened. Really? Maria's grin widened. Absolutely not. The room erupted into laughter as Cain's expression fell. Wait. What? Tobias leaned against the console, shaking his head. You're on your own, kid. No stipend, no benefits. You scavenge what you can. Welcome to the afterlife. That can't be legal, Cain protested. Maria shrugged. Take it up with death. He's great with complaints. Shaniqua checked her clipboard again. I'll get your IDs processed and prepare your new body for integration. Tobias will run you through the rest. Try not to die again, Keith. Cain, he muttered. Whatever, Shaniqua continued. Don't screw this up. I don't have time to replace you. With that, she strode out of the room, her heels clicking loudly in her wake. Tobias sighed heavily, placing his mug on the counter. Okay, rookie, listen up. Since you're stuck with me, here's how it works. Cain leaned forward, eager to finally understand the system. We're ranked by how much soul energy we can sustain and how tough the dungeons we can handle are, Tobias explained. You're starting at rank E, which means you're basically a wet napkin with a sharp stick. Thanks for the vote of confidence, Cain muttered. Maria's rank B, Tobias continued, gesturing at her. She's solid for mid-level dungeons, though she's lazy as hell. Maria winked. Work smarter, not harder. Edgar's rank A, Tobias added, nodding toward the quiet man by the window. When things get tough, he's the one you want. And Shaniqua? Cain asked. All three Reapers answered at once, above my pay grade. Tobias smirked. Don't worry about it, rookie. Just assume she's S-class and hope you never need her to prove it. Look, Tobias continued, all you need to know is that she's the boss and we don't ask questions we don't want answers to. Got it? Cain nodded hesitantly. Tobias grabbed a tablet from the counter, flicking through a series of files. All right, here's the quick and dirty update on the world since you kicked it 4 years ago. 4 years? Cain blurted out. Tobias didn't look up. Yeah. Souls need time to, what's the word? Marinate. You've been out of the loop, so let me fill you in. He cleared his throat and began reading. Dungeons have gotten more common. Satellite surveillance has made collapses less frequent, but they still happen. Everyone's chipped at birth now, and awakened abilities are practically universal. If you don't have one, you're basically a nobody. There's another note here directly from the supervisor, Tobias said. Cain Thorne is dead, but a few people do remember him. Nobody's been sitting around thinking about you. Drop the Cain bullshit. You're not Keith or Cain anymore. Cain frowned. That's harsh. Who am I? Welcome to the afterlife, kid, Edgar said with a grin. Time for you to go find out. Chapter 5, The New Normal. Cain's first sensation was the feeling of being just right. His gangly limbs stretched and bent with ease, his movements fluid in a way they'd never been before. Gone was the awkward stumble of a short, stocky frame. He was taller now, his body wiry and powerful. As he opened his eyes to the gritty, rain-soaked street of Crystal Gate, everything felt brighter and sharper. Whoa, he muttered, his voice deeper yet strangely unfamiliar. He pushed himself off the wall he'd been leaning on, marveling at the ease with which his longer legs carried him upright. What the hell? Across the alley, a stunningly beautiful blonde woman in a sharp leather jacket leaned against a dumpster. Her arms were crossed, and her piercing blue eyes watched him with an amused glint. Enjoying yourself? She asked. Cain froze mid-stretch. Wait, who are you? The woman rolled her eyes. Of course you don't recognize me. It's me, Tara Windstorm. Class C adventurer. Remember? He blinked, confused. No. Should I? She pushed off the dumpster and walked closer, her boots echoing against the pavement. Last time we met, you were Keith. And then Cain. But now you're someone else, apparently. New name, new face, new everything. Cain rubbed the back of his neck. Shaniqua. Tara snorted. Nope. Try again. Maria? Another head shake. Wrong again. Try going bigger. Cain frowned, frustration bubbling. Tobias? Third time's the charm, Tara said with a grin, giving a little twirl to show off her form. When we got the chance to reinvent ourselves, I decided to go all out. You, Mr. Grim Reaper vibes. Me? I'm fabulous. Cain's jaw worked up and down as he tried to process what he was seeing. But you're so unexpected, she said, her grin widening. Yeah, well, not all gays are queer, noob. Get over it. Cain blinked at a loss for words. Tara extended a hand toward him, palm up. Now, let's see that shiny new adventure idea of yours. The system's been upgraded in the 4 years you've been out. I'm curious what death cooked up for you. With a flick of his wrist, Cain summoned his aid's stats. The familiar interface bloomed into existence, but this time it was sleeker, with a faintly metallic sheen. He sent the profile to Tara and she concentrated, curiosity plain on her face. Dungeon Regulation and Oversight Bureau, DRB. Adventure Registration Information. Legal name, Cain Rose. Registration ID, DRB, E1031306666. Affiliation, Guild Certified Adventurer, Hollow Blade. Rank, Class E. Attribute score, Strength 50, Stamina 50, Speed 50, Magic 50. Aptitudes and flaws. Registered merits. Physical proficiency, average strength, stamina, speed, and magic compared to Class E adventurers. Analytical reasoning, demonstrates creative problem-solving in non-standard scenarios. Resilience, shows moderate psychological resilience under pressure. Registered flaws. Physical proficiency, average strength, stamina, speed, and magic compared to Class E adventurers. Combat inexperience, minimal training, and no verified field achievements in dungeon clearing missions. Skill assessment. Ethereal transference allows the user to shift into an incorporeal state, phasing through physical obstacles and evading attacks. Draining grasp drains physical and magical strength from targets upon contact, weakening them while temporarily enhancing the user. Spirit Blade summons versatile spectral weaponry, capable of shifting between forms such as a sword, hammer, or scythe, tailored to the combat scenario. Performance record, no verified dungeon completions. Behavioral note, exhibits a tendency toward procrastination and overcompensation in social and professional scenarios. Employment status, currently affiliated with Hollow Blade Guild. Tara whistled low, clearly impressed. Damn, Cain, you're officially balanced mediocrity. Congrats. Thanks. I think, Cain said, squinting at the readout. Tara clapped him on the back. Don't take it personally. Everyone starts at the bottom. But here's the thing, Reapers advance a little differently than the living. For them, training and dungeon runs make a difference. For us, it's all about harvesting souls for death. That's our whole purpose. Death made sure the rewards are tied to doing the job. Cain frowned. So, no matter how many traps I dodge or goblins I fight, I'm not leveling up? Tara shrugged. Not unless you're reaping. That's the gig. Souls power us, keep the Reaper system running, and make us stronger. Cain hesitated, then asked, have you ever seen death? Like, the big guy himself? Tara's confident grin faltered for a split second, and she looked away. Not directly. But one time, in the in-between, I got uncomfortable. Like, piss myself uncomfortable. And then Shaniqua came out of the back room, looking, well, like she'd been involved in something. Cain tilted his head. Above your pay grade? Tara's grin returned, sharp and knowing. Exactly. Now let's get moving. Orientation waits for no Reaper. As they walked through the busy streets of Crystalgate, Cain's nerves grew with every step. The Hollow Blade Guild had been his first real opportunity, but the memory of its last members weighed heavily. The entire team was gone now, except for Penny, the youngest member and sole survivor. Tara seemed to sense his unease. Look, I read your file. I know what happened at Crystalgate Cathedral. But you can't afford to dwell on the past. Cain Keith, whoever you were, he's dead. Cain Rose is what the Reapers need. The Hollowblade Guild is the top E-rank team in the area now. Your job is to keep them going, reap souls, and prevent others from ending up like your old crew. No pressure, Cain muttered, his hands tightening into fists. Tara smirked. Relax. You've got skills, and we'll make sure you're ready. Just remember, it's not about proving yourself anymore. It's about making sure you make it back alive. Cain nodded, her words resonating. As they approached the Hollowblade HQ, a mix of anticipation and dread filled him. His second chance had begun, and this time, he wouldn't waste it. Cain stepped into the Hollowblade Guild HQ, his heart thudding unevenly. The building had clearly seen better days. The peeling paint and creaky floorboards gave it a lived-in feel, but not in a comforting way. It was more like a perpetual fixer-upper that no one had the funds or energy to fix up. Behind the front desk, Penny Hollow was exactly as he remembered her, sharp-eyed, smirking, and radiating the kind of confidence that dared anyone to question her ability. Her auburn hair was tied back in a messy ponytail, and her boots were propped casually on the desk. She looked up, and her eyes widened in genuine surprise when she saw Tara. "Well, damn," Penny said, sitting up straight and swinging her feet to the floor. "You're Tara Windstorm, a Class C adventurer. What are you doing here?" Tara flipped her hair with theatrical flair and gestured dismissively toward Cain. "Introducing this one to his new guild. Believe me, it's no special case, I just lost a bet." Cain blinked. "Wait, what bet?" "Not important," Tara said flatly, crossing her arms. She turned back to Penny. "He has no accommodations, no transportation, no income, basically a lost cause. But someone, somewhere, thought he'd fit in here. That's all I know. He's your problem now." She glanced around the shabby HQ like it was the least notable place in existence. "I'm supposed to go on his first dungeon run, so let's get this over with as soon as possible, yeah? I have important things to do." Penny's smirk twitched, and she nodded. "Yeah, I can see that this is life or death level stuff for you." She turned to Cain. "You're already accepted, so the paperwork's just a formality. And heads up, we don't have housing, but there's an old beater in the back. If you're handy with a wrench, you might be able to get it running. Or you can sleep in it until you figure something out." Cain sighed. "Paperwork again? Feels like I just did this yesterday." Penny reached for a clipboard, her smirk firmly in place. "Paperwork waits for no one," she said, almost automatically. Cain's mind flashed to Griffin's gruff voice and the rain-streaked windows of a van long gone. "Neither does death," Cain said quietly, the words slipping out like a reflex. The air in the room shifted. Penny froze mid-motion, her fingers tightening around the clipboard. Her smirk vanished, replaced by an unreadable stillness. Her jaw clenched slightly as her eyes flickered downward, avoiding his. She inhaled sharply through her nose and set the clipboard down with deliberate care. Without a word, she turned, grabbed a set of keys from a hook, and tossed them to Cain. "Here," she said briskly, her voice clipped. "Not even sure if it runs, and you might be better off walking." Cain caught the keys, frowning as his stomach twisted. His eyes fell on the worn emblem etched into the metal. His heart skipped a beat. "You still have this?" The words escaped before he could stop them. Penny turned slowly, her brow furrowing. "What do you mean?" Cain scrambled to recover. "I mean, this is an old classic key. A Geo-Metro. You don't see these much anymore." Tara snorted. "There's probably a reason for that." She stepped back toward the door. "Well, I'll leave you guys to it. Here's my info." She flicked her wrist, and her aide sent a contact ping to Penny's system. "Don't call unless he's ready." With that, she swept out of the room, her heels clicking against the worn floorboards. Cain looked down at the keys again, his chest tightening with a mix of nostalgia and dread. This was his car. But how? The questions buzzed in his mind as Penny watched him carefully, her guarded expression hiding painful memories. "Go check out the car," she said with a dismissive wave. "It might come in handy." Cain nodded slowly and walked toward the back of the HQ, the keys clinking softly in his hand. Cain stepped into the back lot of the Hollow Blade Guild, and there it was. His trusty steed. The battle wagon. The 1994 Geo Metro sat exactly as he remembered it, only worse. The cracked windshield now had a web of smaller cracks radiating from the original impact. One of the tires was completely flat, and the faded paint had surrendered further to rust. Despite its state, Cain's heart swelled. "Still beautiful," he muttered, walking around the car with reverence. "Even more beat up than yesterday, literally yesterday for me." His fingers brushed over the dented hood. "It doesn't matter what's wrong. Nothing on a Metro costs more than $90 to fix. I once swapped out the entire transmission by hand with just a wrench and a screwdriver." He opened the driver's door, which groaned in protest, and slid into the seat. The familiar smell of old upholstery and faint mildew wrapped around him like a warm hug. Grinning like an idiot, he patted the dashboard. "One more for old time's sake, baby." He slid the key into the ignition and turned it, holding his breath. Nothing. Not even a click. "Dead battery," he muttered, laughing softly. Of course. He didn't even bother trying to open the driver's door. Instead, he cranked down the window by hand, a painfully slow process as the mechanism groaned in protest, and reached through to open the door from the outside. It creaked open, and Cain slid out of the seat with a contented sigh. With a resigned shrug, Cain circled to the hatchback. Popping it open, he found his old pillow and blanket tucked exactly where he'd left them. The same blanket he'd used during the nights when he'd lost his apartment and had no choice but to call the battle wagon home. He picked them up, brushing off the faint smell of mildew, and couldn't stop the grin that spread across his face. Behind him, a voice called out, "I don't think I've ever seen anyone so happy to borrow a car that doesn't run." Cain turned to see Penny leaning against the back door of HQ, arms crossed, her expression caught somewhere between amusement and exasperation. "This thing is awesome," Cain declared. "I want to buy it." Penny snorted. "You don't have any money." "I'll work it off," Cain said, gesturing to the car with a flourish. "People don't appreciate classic cars like this anymore." Penny raised an eyebrow. "I don't think anyone ever appreciated classic cars like this." She tapped her chin thoughtfully, her expression turning more serious. "Doesn't matter. We can talk about it later. Right now, you should finish the paperwork so I can get dibs on the next run. With Tara Windstorm going into an E-rank dungeon, we should get priority over anyone else interested." She hesitated, then added, "I'll take your cut from the next job in exchange for the car, and I'll help you get it running, since you like it so much." Cain's grin widened. "That would be fantastic." As Penny pushed off the door frame and started heading back inside, she paused, glancing over her shoulder. "You know, I think the last guy who owned this car was named Cain." Cain blinked but quickly recovered, his grin never faltering. "Well, it must be fate then." He looked back at the battle wagon, his grin unwavering as he patted the hood affectionately. "Looks like we're back in business, old girl." A couple of hours later, Cain scribbled his name on the last line of the mountain of paperwork and handed it back to Penny. She gave it a cursory glance before tossing it onto the already chaotic pile on her desk. "All set," she said. "The run's scheduled for tomorrow. Tara's been notified and will meet us there. We leave at 3 a.m. sharp. It's a 4-hour drive through the country, so get some sleep. You're gonna need it." Cain groaned but nodded. "Got it." Penny gestured toward the back hallway. "Before you head out, check the storage room for equipment. It's slim pickings, but it's better than nothing." As Cain stood to leave, Penny leaned back in her chair and added, "I'll call 2 other members to join us. They need the experience and the pay. Honestly, we'll probably just be watching Ms. Windstorm do her thing, and she'll be there to make sure you don't screw it up. Easy money for everyone except you." Cain raised an eyebrow. "Oh, you run dungeons now?" Penny's expression hardened slightly. "Now? I've been running dungeons for 2 years, and I've been managing this entire guild for 4. You're the only new guy here." Cain winced, realizing he really needs to get a better grip on his lip. "Right. Sorry." My bad. Penny smirked. Yeah, it won't take you long to get used to a woman in charge, and if it does then I'll just make sure to let Ms. Windstorm handle that for me. With a sigh, Cain trudged into the dimly lit storage room. The shelves were lined with mismatched odds and ends, most of which looked like they'd seen better days years ago. He picked through the mess, finding a hodgepodge of leather armor and scuffed boots. They weren't great, but they'd do. In the corner, he spotted a dented sword leaning against the wall. He picked it up and gave it a test swing, the blade wobbling slightly in its rusted hilt. Back up, he muttered, strapping it to his belt. His spirit blade would handle the real action. As he examined his gear, his aid chip pinged with a notification. Meet up in the Hollow Blade training room in 1 hour. /Terra.w. Not much time, Cain muttered, quickly gathering the rest of the salvageable equipment. With his arms full, he headed to the training room. Chapter 6. Echoes of the Gate. The Hollow Blade training room was functional but worn, bearing the scars of countless adventurers who had come and gone. On the far wall, a faded mural depicted Griffin, Serena, Doc, and the assassin whose name Cain had never even learned. They loomed larger than life, their postures heroic yet menacing, gazing down at the room as if judging anyone who stepped into their domain. Cain stared at the mural for a moment, his throat tightening. He hadn't known them well enough to mourn their loss, but they had given him a chance when no one else had. That meant something. Focus, Cain, Terra called from the center of the room, snapping him out of his thoughts. He nodded and stepped into the sparring circle, his stomach twisting. Okay, let's start with ethereal transference. The first attempt was clumsy, his body flickering like a faulty light bulb. The drain on his magic hit him immediately, a sharp tug at his reserves. Cain gritted his teeth and tried again, but the incorporeal state slipped through his grasp, and his magic dipped further. Come on, he growled, sweat already forming on his brow. Don't push too hard, Terra warned, circling him like a predator. Every failed attempt costs you. If you burn through your reserves, we're done for the night. Cain clenched his fists and gave it another shot, but the flickering form collapsed even faster this time. Frustration boiled over. Why can't I hold it? Because you're trying to brute force it, Terra said, her tone sharp. This skill is precision, not strength. If you're sloppy, it'll drain you dry before you get anything useful out of it. She gestured toward a training dummy. Switch to your spirit blade. Let's see if you can actually hit something. Cain summoned his weapon, and the scythe formed in his hands, or rather, something pretending to be a scythe. The blade was short and dull, more like a stick with a knife awkwardly taped to it. He stared at it, his jaw tightening. Terra sighed, pinching the bridge of her nose. Have you ever even seen a scythe in real life, much less held one? Well, no, Cain admitted. The spirit blade works from your soul, Terra explained. If you want to wield a weapon, you need to master it first, physically and mentally. Good luck finding a martial master who uses a scythe, by the way. If you're serious about this, start with something you actually know. She pointed to the backup sword strapped to his belt. Like that. Cain grimaced but nodded, dismissing the scythe and replacing it with a spectral sword. At least the blade looked like a sword now, even if his swings were as sloppy as ever. Better, Terra said, watching his form critically. You're still terrible, but at least this makes sense. They spent the next hour working through basic movements, Cain's magic dipping dangerously low as he struggled to hold his spirit blade. By the time his reserves hit 10%, he was swaying on his feet. Time for a lesson, Terra said, her tone firm. Draining grasp. Use it on me. Cain hesitated. Are you sure? Terra crossed her arms. Do it before you fall over. He reached out, activating draining grasp, and placed his hand on her arm. The effect was instant. Strength and magic flowed into him, his reserves jumping by 5%. Terra stepped back, flexing her fingers. Not bad, she said. It's a small boost, but it's enough to keep you going in a pinch. With practice, you'll be able to draw more. Cain exhaled in relief, the surge of energy easing his exhaustion. This feels fantastic. Tara smirked. It gets better. Edgar told me you could pull off a triple combo with your skill set if you get good enough. It's not easy, but if you can do it, it'll be devastating. Cain's eyes lit up. What's the combo? Spirit chain, Tara said, her grin widening. Turn your spirit blade into a chain, make it ethereal, and infuse it with draining grasp. When the chain passes through a group of enemies, it should drain every one of them and boost you. If you can hold the form, every swing makes you stronger and replenishes your magic. That's amazing, Cain said, excitement bubbling in his chest. Yeah, it is, Tara agreed. Edgar might be an A-ranked S-hat, but he knows his stuff. Cain tried the combo, forming a spectral chain that flickered unsteadily. His first attempt failed, the chain dissolving before it reached Tara. The second wasn't much better. After several more tries, he finally succeeded, the chain passing through Tara and draining a small amount of her magic. The boost was immediate, but so was the exhaustion. Cain staggered, breathing heavily. If that hadn't worked, I'd be done for. You're done anyway, Tara said, steadying him with a hand. You're wiped. Sit down. Cain sank to the floor as Tara knelt beside him. Here, she said. Basic meditation techniques. They'll help you recover magic faster. Work on this every chance you get, and practice more. A lot more. Cain nodded, his body aching but his spirit invigorated. He had a long road ahead, but for the first time, he felt like he could see where it was going. As Cain sat cross-legged on the floor, practicing the meditation techniques Tara had just taught him, she finally stopped pacing and let out an exasperated sigh. Her patience, apparently, had reached its limit. Okay, one more thing, she said, spinning around to face him with a sharp gesture. I've been holding this in all night, but I can't anymore. Cain blinked up at her, confused. What? That, Tara snapped, pointing directly at him. What you're wearing. It's been driving me insane since you walked in here. Cain looked down at himself, a chipped longsword strapped to his side, a mismatched collection of leather and metal armor, and boots that didn't even match each other, let alone the rest of his gear. The armor creaked whenever he moved, and some of the straps were clearly tied in hasty knots. Tara waved her hands in frustration. That sword looks like it's one swing away from shattering, and your armor, if you can call it that, is a patchwork nightmare. It doesn't protect anything vital, and it's so poorly fitted you're more likely to stab yourself than the enemy. She ran a hand through her hair and groaned. I didn't want to distract you during training, but seriously, Cain. You look ridiculous. Cain's face flushed as he scratched the back of his neck. It's all I could find in the storage room. It's pathetic, Tara said bluntly, her tone cutting but not unkind. And I can't show up tomorrow with you looking like that. I have a reputation to think about. People know me. I'm not about to be seen with someone who looks like they scavenged their gear from a landfill. Cain opened his mouth to argue, but quickly closed it as Tara's glare intensified. I'll bring you some loner gear, she continued, her voice firm but resigned. It won't be great, but at least it won't make me die of second-hand embarrassment. You can return it once you get something that doesn't make you look like a medieval clown. Deal? Cain sighed, nodding reluctantly. Deal. Tara crossed her arms, her expression softening ever so slightly. Good. And Cain? Next time, at least try to look like you belong here. I'll see you at 3 a.m. sharp. Don't be late. She turned on her heel and strode out of the room, her muttered complaints about thrift store nights echoing faintly as she disappeared. Cain sighed, looking down at his gear again. Guess it is pretty bad, he muttered, shaking his head. Cain made his way back to the guild's back lot, the cool night air settling in his bones. The battle wagon sat there like a faithful old dog, rusted but unyielding. He ran his fingers over the hood, brushing away a layer of dust and smiling faintly. Not tonight, old girl, he muttered. Maybe next time. With a sigh, he popped the hatchback open, folded the back seat down, and climbed in with the musty blanket and dry-rotted pillow he'd found earlier. As he tried to stretch out, reality hit him like a low ceiling. He wasn't 5 feet 8 inches anymore. The extra 6 inches made an enormous difference when trying to sleep in a Geo Metro. His knees bent awkwardly, pressed against the rear hatch, while his shoulders dug into the uneven surface of the folded seat. Cain sighed, shifting in frustration. He tried turning onto his side, but the space was even worse that way. There wasn't enough room to toss and turn properly, but he gave it his best effort anyway. Eventually, exhaustion won out, and he managed to drift into an uncomfortable, fitful sleep. He wasn't sure how long he'd been out when a blinding flashlight beam pierced the darkness, jerking him awake. Squinting against the glare, he raised a hand to shield his face. "Rise and shine, little flower," came Penny's chipper voice from the other side of the flashlight. "Flower," Cain croaked, his voice still thick with sleep. Penny grinned, flicking off the flashlight and leaning on the open hatch. "Rose." Cain rose. "Flower. Get it?" Cain groaned, rubbing his face. "It's too early for this." "It's 2:30 a.m., Penny said, stepping back and crossing her arms. "Time to get moving. The guild van's ready to go. You've got a dungeon run to not screw up." Cain rolled out of the car, stiff and sore from his cramped accommodations. As he stretched, his head bumped against the open hatch, earning a muttered curse. Penny laughed, tossing a small pack toward him. "Come on, big guy," she said, turning toward the garage. "Let's see if you can stay awake on the drive." Cain grabbed the pack and followed her toward the waiting van, muttering under his breath. "Little flower, she's never gonna let that go." As Penny and Cain stepped out of the Hollow Blade HQ, the early morning chill clung to the air. Two women stood waiting near the guild van, chatting quietly but turning as they approached. The sisters were strikingly similar, both thick and undeniably well-proportioned, their brown padded leather armor hugging their curves in a way that Cain could not ignore. He had to force his eyes away awkwardly as the snug fit of their gear highlighted their figures, the chest plates seeming to carry a little extra responsibility as they moved. Each carried a short sword at their hip and a small buckler slung across their backs, their presence both commanding and distractingly confident. "Morning," Penny called, gesturing toward Cain. Cain rose. "Meet Bria and Lena Kell. They're dungeon jumpers from our B team. Don't let the E rank fool you. They're gaining experience fast and climbing steadily." Bria, the taller of the two with a short bob of auburn hair, grinned and stepped forward, her sword hand resting casually on her hip. "Nice to meet you, Cain. So you're the new guy, huh?" Lena, with a matching face but long braided hair, chuckled. "Where's your gear? You're not planning to go in like that, are you?" Cain shrugged, keeping his tone casual as he looked skyward. "It's being delivered to the gate." Bria raised an eyebrow. "Delivered, huh? Oh, you must be special." Cain smirked, enjoying the unintended compliment. "Not really. Tara's bringing it." Both sisters froze, their expressions shifting from curiosity to shock. "Tara Windstorm?" Lena asked, her voice incredulous. "She's bringing your gear?" Cain tried to play it off, but the grin tugging at the corner of his mouth betrayed him. "It's not that big of a deal." Penny snorted. "Yeah, sure it's not. They were in the training room for hours last night. I watched the feed." She turned to the sisters with a grin. "Believe me, he's really not that big of a deal." Tara, on the other hand, amazing as always. Cain's ego deflated slightly, but he managed a sheepish laugh as Bria and Lena exchanged amused glances. "Let's get going," Penny said, gesturing to the van. "We've got a long drive ahead of us." The guild van rumbled along the winding country roads as the sun began to rise, casting a golden hue over the fields and forests. Cain sat in the back, trying to focus on his meditation techniques, but the rhythmic motion of the van combined with a direct view of the sisters denied him any real progress. Eventually, he was able to drift off to sleep for a moment. When the van finally pulled to a stop, Cain jolted awake, rubbing his eyes as he looked out the window. They had arrived at the gate checkpoint, and the area was swarming with DRB enforcement agents. The entire site was cordoned off with bright yellow barriers, and uniformed officers moved purposefully among parked vehicles and small clusters of adventurers. As Cain stepped out of the van, he took in the scene before him, rows of enforcement vehicles, adventurers in full gear, and agents checking IDs against glowing monitors. The area was meticulously cordoned off, yellow barriers marking the perimeter. "Wow," Cain muttered, his eyes scanning the operation. "They're really not messing around." Penny nodded, pulling out her aid chip for verification. Security's gotten tighter, thankfully. Broad raised their standards after too many deaths in the gates. Too many unqualified adventurers trying their luck and not making it back. Her voice faltered slightly, her usual sharpness replaced with something softer. Gate ratings have gotten stricter, too. It's not worth losing people if everyone would just do their jobs. The system's there for a reason. Cain glanced at her, catching the faint shadow that crossed her face. He didn't need to ask to know who she was thinking about. Penny cleared her throat, straightening. "Anyway," she said, her tone regaining its edge, "get your aid ready. They'll need to scan it before we head through." Each of them pinged their aid stats to the officers before being allowed through. The process was efficient but strict, and Cain couldn't help but feel a pang of nervousness as his data was scanned. On the other side of the checkpoint, Tara was waiting with a duffel bag slung over her shoulder. She waved them over, her usual aloof expression in place, but Cain caught a faint glint of satisfaction in her eyes as she handed the bag to him. "Here," she said. "Your gear." Cain unzipped the bag and pulled out the armor first. It was tight-fitting, solid black leather that looked high-grade and expensive. To his surprise, it felt breathable and moved with his body as easily as regular clothes. "Wow," Cain murmured, genuinely impressed. Tara smirked. "Wait until you see the sword." Cain drew the weapon from the scabbard, the steel gleaming in the early morning light. Etched along the blade was a single word: scythe. "It's perfect," Cain said, staring at the weapon in awe. "Present from Maria," Tara said casually, leaning closer. She heard what happened in the training room. "You still owe me for the armor, though." Her voice softened as she added, "Reapers have to help each other when we can. Remember that." Cain nodded, the weight of her words sinking in. "I will. Thanks, Tara." She straightened, her usual no-nonsense demeanor returning. "Good. Now suit up. We've got a job to do." As they approached the checkpoint, Penny greeted Tara with a casual wave. "Morning, Tara." Tara returned the greeting with a nod. "Morning, Penny." Her eyes shifted to the sisters, her expression sharpening with curiosity. "And you two must be Lena and Bria." Bria blinked, clearly surprised. "You've heard of us?" Tara laughed, a rich and easy sound. "Well, I've heard about you, yes. You're both kind of hard to miss, and, well, guys talk about gals, and you're definitely gals." She grinned broadly, clearly amused. Bria and Lena exchanged looks before bursting into laughter. Lena chimed in, "I'm sure it was all about our dungeon prowess, right?" Tara winked. "Of course. Your professionalism is what has everyone going on and on." The group laughed as they continued walking toward the glowing blue gate in the distance, the atmosphere light and friendly. But Cain barely registered the conversation. His mind swirled with fragments of fire and lightning, the phantom pain of his final moments in the gate flooding his senses. His breath hitched, and his feet stopped moving entirely. The laughter faded as the women turned to look at him. Tara was the first to step forward, holding up a hand to stop the others. "Keep going," she said firmly. "I'll have a moment with Cain." The sisters hesitated, but Penny gave Tara a slight nod, gesturing for Lena and Bria to follow her. The three of them continued toward the gate, their voices fading into the background. Tara turned back to Cain, her expression unreadable, but her tone low and intense. "I know what you're feeling, Cain," she said, stepping closer. "We all go through it on our first return. That's why I'm here." Cain clenched his fists, his jaw tight as he stared at the ground. "You went through some bad shit? I know because I went through it too," Tara continued, her voice softer but no less firm. "But you need to remember something. The kid who died in that gate? He's dead. That's not you anymore. You've been rebuilt. Refashioned into an actual instrument of death." She leaned in, her voice dropping to a forceful whisper. Death, Cain. Do you understand that? Death chose you to do a job, and he chose you for a reason. Cain swallowed hard, her words cutting through the haze in his mind. Tara's tone shifted, the aggression balanced with a touch of encouragement. Now buck up and keep walking before I have to kick your ass all the way into that gate. Cain nodded slowly at first, then squared his shoulders and lifted his chin. Thanks, Tara, he said, his voice steady. She stepped back and gave him a satisfied smirk. Don't mention it. Now let's go. Together, they continued toward the gate, its eerie glow reflecting in Cain's determined eyes. Chapter 7. Carnage and Combustion. Cain stood before the shimmering blue gate, his heart pounding but his resolve firm. Worry bubbled beneath the surface, but he shoved it down with a sharp breath. I'm not going to die. Worst case scenario? Maybe lose an arm or a leg, but I can deal with that. I'm one of Death's chosen, right? Stepping through, he braced for impact, fire, lightning, or whatever chaos he'd built up in his head. Instead, a warm summer breeze tickled his face. He blinked, surprised, as green pastures stretched out before him, rolling into the horizon. The hill in the distance caught his eye. It was large, brown, and moving? No, it wasn't moving, it just looked fuzzy. Weird. Shit, Lena muttered, breaking the silence. Hell yeah, Bria shouted, her expression the exact opposite of her sister. Fuck me, Penny added with a groan. Tara sighed, placing her hands on her hips. We've got ants. Cain blinked, confused. Ants? Penny shot him a sharp look, her tone incredulous. Have you read a training manual? You're supposed to be familiar with the known zones. This is a very well-documented one. Cain scratched the back of his neck, sheepish. My manuals are a bit out of date. Tara stepped in smoothly before Penny could escalate. One of the reasons I'm here, Penny. No worries. Good, Penny muttered, though her tone was less than enthusiastic. I almost forgot you were here. Ants give me the willies. This'll be my second run through this one. Second run? Dungeons repeat sometimes? Cain asked, his curiosity momentarily overriding his embarrassment. Tara clapped her hands together, her tone brisk. Tell you what, girls. How about you hang tight for a bit? Me and Grim Sleeper here will go handle the hard part, and then we can all go underground together. Sound good? Penny didn't hesitate, her gaze snapping back to Cain. It's your run, Ms. Windstorm. Personally, I'm absolutely fine with that. She turned to Cain, her tone sharpening. Not only will you be training on weaponry that looks like you've never held before, you'll also be sitting for dungeon guide tests for the next month. Minimum. Cain opened his mouth to protest, but Penny cut him off sharply, her voice rising. You're lucky I don't report you to Broad for an incomplete application to the guild. At best. Blatant falsification is also on the table. Tara stepped forward, her demeanor calm but firm. She could tell this was going poorly and felt she had better intercede. Shaniqua would not be happy if Cain got barred from guilds on his first day out. Ms. Hollow, this is a possible oversight from one of my acquaintances. You have my apologies and my assistance until we can get him up to speed. The entire group watched as the possibilities played across Penny's face, her mind clearly negotiating the idea of a Class C adventurer aiding her guild. After a long moment, her expression softened. You are generous with your time, Ms. Windstorm. That would be a great boon to our guild. You have a deal. The sisters exchanged relieved glances, nodding their agreement, while Cain shot Tara a grateful look. Bria perked up. Make sure you save the caverns for me. I've got something special for scenarios just like this. Tara perked up, thankful for a good turn of events for once, do tell. Bria shook her head. Nah, I'll save it for a surprise. It will be nice to impress you, and then you can go tell all these boys with the big mouths that the Jumper Sisters are more than just a nice pair of shields. Tara laughed out loud. Sounds like a plan. We will be a while, but we'll be back when the workers are cold. As they started walking toward the fuzzy, shifting hill, Cain fell in step with Tara. How many dungeon types were logged when you were studying the guides? Tara asked, her tone less biting now. About 70, I think, Cain replied. I never actually counted them. Tara chuckled. Now there are over 300, and they duplicate often. These days, finding a new one is rare. But if you do stumble into something unknown, you've got to register the entire run with Broad for documentation. No exceptions. Cain nodded, though his attention was drawn to the shifting hill. And this one? What's the deal with ants? Tara pointed toward the hill. It's like this. The Reapers see these dungeons as pocket spaces we access through the gates. They're not huge, some are a few miles wide, some as small as a single building. Ants, specifically, is about 2 miles across, but the underground caverns are what get people lost. If you keep walking in a straight line here, the space loops you back to where you started. Endless green pastures. Cain tilted his head. So, that hill is an anthill? Exactly, Tara said, her tone flat. A very large anthill. And the ants are the size of dogs. Hundreds, maybe even 1,000 of them. Cain's face paled. That's unpleasant. Tell me about it, Tara said with a sigh. Adventurers typically try to avoid killing everything. Swarming isn't fun. This expensive leather armor I loaned you. She tapped his chest. Won't last 10 seconds. These ants tear through plate mail like it's paper. Cain grimaced. Great. So what about us? You said that's what adventurers do. What's the Reaper plan? Tara smirked, tapping the hilt of one of her blades. Good question. Dungeons reset regardless of what happens inside. The creatures rebuild, the traps reset. It's like the whole thing gets rewound to its original state. But here's the catch. There's always a chance that every dungeon will contain the souls of fallen humans. That's why we have to search every corner every time. It doesn't matter if a Reaper cleared it out last month or if it wiped an entire team of adventurers. The possibility is always there. How do we know? Cain asked, his unease growing. We don't, Tara said cheerfully. Cain stopped in his tracks. But you said there are miles of caverns. Yes, that's exactly what I said. As if on cue, a rustling sound came from the tall grass to their right. Cain froze, his heart hammering. Tara didn't flinch. Here we go, she said, a gleam of excitement in her eyes. The grass parted, revealing a massive, sleek ant. Its mandibles clicked menacingly as it charged toward them. Watch and learn, Tara said, her voice low. She raised her hand, and the air around her seemed to hum with energy. A powerful gust of wind exploded outward, ripping through the grass and slamming into the charging ant like a battering ram. The creature skidded back several feet, its legs scrabbling against the ground in a desperate attempt to regain balance. Before it could recover, Tara was already moving. Her twin blades flashed in the sunlight, spinning in a mesmerizing blur as she closed the distance with terrifying speed. With a sharp, precise slash, her left blade severed the ant's front legs, sending it crashing to the ground. She followed up with a downward strike from her right blade, piercing the creature's thorax. The ant let out a shrill, chittering screech before collapsing in a twitching heap. Tara stood over it, her expression calm, as if dispatching a dog-sized insect was just another Tuesday. She flicked her blades clean with a quick motion and turned to Cain with a grin. See? Windstorm isn't just a nickname. She sheathed her blades, gesturing for him to follow. Come on, Flower. We've got a queen to find. I liked Grim Sleeper much better. Cain huffed. Tara crouched low in the grass, her twin blades shimmering faintly in the sunlight. She glanced over her shoulder at Cain, who stood a few feet behind her, scythe, resting awkwardly against his shoulder. His expression was a mix of determination and unease, as if he couldn't decide whether he was ready or about to throw up. All right, Grim, Tara said, her tone light but firm. We're wiping out everything above ground. No stragglers. Think you can keep up? Cain forced a smirk, gripping the sword a little tighter. I'll do my best. Good. Stick close, don't get cocky, and for the love of death, don't get in my way. She didn't wait for a reply, darting forward in a blur of motion. The fight began immediately. Ants poured out of the hill in waves, their dog-sized bodies clicking and hissing as they charged. Tara was a whirlwind among them, her movements so fluid and precise it was almost mesmerizing. She darted around the first ant, a shimmering blur as she activated Windwalk. In an instant, she was behind it, her blades flashing in quick succession. The creature collapsed in a heap before it even realized what had hit it. Cain hesitated, watching her work. "Wow," he muttered, before an ant lunged at him from the side. "Focus, Grim." Tara's shout snapped him out of his awe. Cain raised scythe, just in time to block the charging ant, the impact nearly knocking him off his feet. With a grunt, he swung the weapon in a wide arc, the blade carving through the creature's body. It crumpled to the ground, twitching. Nearby, Tara flicked her wrist, sending a wind blast barreling into a group of ants. The gust slammed into them like a wrecking ball, scattering their bodies across the battlefield. She wasted no time following up, her blades slicing through the survivors with terrifying efficiency. "Keep moving," she called out, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Don't let them box us in." Cain nodded, trying to find his rhythm. He spotted another ant charging straight for him, its mandibles snapping hungrily. His heart raced as he stretched out his hand, summoning his spirit chain. The ethereal chain shot forward, wrapping around the creature's legs and yanking it off balance. "Yes," he shouted, grinning at his small victory. But his triumph was short-lived. Another ant leaped at him from the side, its shadow looming large as it descended. Panic flared in his chest as he instinctively activated ethereal transference. His body flickered, becoming translucent, and the ant passed harmlessly through him, crashing into the ground behind him. "I did it!" Cain yelled, his voice filled with glee. "Watch your six, idiot!" Tara's warning came too late. Another ant lunged at him, its mandibles wide. Before it could reach him, Tara appeared out of nowhere, her windwalk propelling her forward in a blur. Her blades flashed, slicing cleanly through the ant and sending it tumbling to the ground. She turned to Cain, her eyes blazing. "You want to survive? Stop celebrating every little win and keep your head in the game." Cain gulped, nodding quickly. "Got it. No more celebrating." "Good." Tara didn't wait for him to recover, diving back into the fray. The ground became a battlefield of twitching legs and shattered exoskeletons as Tara's speed and precision dismantled the swarm. Cain did his best to keep up, his sword swinging awkwardly but effectively, each successful strike boosting his shaky confidence. "How many of these things are there?" Cain shouted as another wave poured out of the hill. "Enough to make this fun." Tara replied with a grin, slicing through two ants in one fluid motion. Cain wasn't sure he'd call this fun, but watching Tara work? That was something else entirely. Tara sat cross-legged on the ground, her twin blades resting beside her as she closed her eyes and began to meditate. A faint breeze stirred the air around her, calming and rhythmic. Cain leaned against a nearby boulder, his sword resting across his lap. The word scythe engraved on its blade gleamed faintly in the sunlight. "That was," Cain began, searching for the right words. "Incredible. Watching you fight, it was like watching a storm tear through those ants. You didn't just fight them. You owned them." Tara opened one eye, her lips quirking into a small smile. "Flattery will get you nowhere, Grim." "I'm serious," Cain said, sitting up straighter. "The way you move, the way you handle those blades, it's insane. You're like an artist, but instead of a paintbrush, you've got, swords. Deadly, terrifying swords." Tara chuckled softly. "Well, I've had a little practice." She closed her eye again, taking a deep breath and letting it out slowly. A few feet away, Penny, Bria, and Lena watched the exchange with varying levels of annoyance. "I can't believe we had to sit here while all that was going on," Bria muttered, gesturing toward the battlefield in the distance. Penny shrugged. "It wasn't my idea. But don't worry, you'll get your chance." Lena perked up. "Really?" Penny smirked, crossing her arms. "Oh, absolutely. Since Ms. Windstorm so graciously offered to assist us for the next month, I'll be doubling our dungeon runs." DRB will have no complaints about it either, not with a Class C helping out in an E-Class dungeon. This is like hitting the jackpot. Bria's excitement dimmed slightly. Double the runs? That sounds exhausting. You'll survive, Penny replied with a grin. And it'll be worth it. Having a C-Class adventure on hand is ridiculously rare for a dungeon like this. We'll be swimming in resources. Honestly, I'm almost willing to forgive Grimm's lack of knowledge, because this more than makes up for it. Cain shot her a glance, but wisely said nothing. Inside he was ecstatic that Penny just referred to him as Grimm. He sincerely hoped that one sticks. He will have to thank Tara for that big time. As they made their way toward the towering anthill, the group passed through the aftermath of Tara's earlier rampage. The carnage was staggering. Ant bodies were strewn across the battlefield, some cleaved cleanly in two, others shattered or crumpled as if they'd been caught in a hurricane. Wow, Lena said, her voice hushed. She did all this? Looks like it, Bria added, her tone filled with awe. Cain couldn't help but chime in. I was there too, you know. Bria glanced at him, raising an eyebrow. Oh! How many did you take down? Cain hesitated, scratching the back of his neck. At least 2. The girls burst into laughter, their giggles echoing across the battlefield. Even Penny cracked a smirk. 2, Bria repeated, shaking her head. Well, don't spend that kill count all in one place, Grim Sleeper. Tara glanced back. He was there for moral support, and he did fetch me a water. So there's that. Cain grumbled under his breath, but a faint smile tugged at his lips. He couldn't deny it, they weren't wrong. When they reached the base of the hill, Bria stepped forward, squatting near the dark cave-like entrance. Her expression shifted, growing focused as she stretched out her hands. What are you doing? Cain asked, leaning closer. Just watch, Penny said, a knowing grin on her face. A faint green glow began to emanate from Bria's palms, and within moments, a thick fog began to pour from her hands, spilling into the tunnel. The air grew heavy with an acrid, almost metallic scent as the fog coiled and twisted, sinking deeper into the hill. Stay out of the fog, Bria muttered, her voice strained. It's not healthy. Cain took a step back, his eyes wide. Noted. Tara stood protectively nearby, her blades at the ready as she scanned the horizon for any approaching threats. Minutes passed, and Bria's shoulders began to sag, sweat forming on her brow. Lena stepped closer, worry etched across her face. Bria, you're pushing yourself too hard. Stop before you burn out. I'm fine, Bria snapped, though her voice was weaker now. Almost there. Finally, she stopped, rising unsteadily to her feet. She wiped her forehead with the back of her hand and turned to the group with a tired grin. Okay, everyone, run. Tara didn't hesitate, grabbing Cain by the arm and pulling him into a sprint. The group scattered, not waiting to see what would happen next. They were 100 yards away when Bria stopped abruptly, turning back to face the hill. With a dramatic clap of her hands, a green flaming arrow shot from her palms, streaking toward the cave entrance. The arrow struck the lingering fog, and for a moment, there was silence. Then, the ground erupted in a deafening explosion. A massive plume of green fire burst from the hill, sending dirt and debris flying in every direction. The earth trembled beneath their feet as the shockwave rolled over them. Cain stumbled but managed to stay upright, his mouth hanging open as he took in the destruction. That was insane. Tara walked over to Bria, a wide grin on her face. You really are much more than just a nice pair of shields, aren't you? Bria shrugged and smiled, still catching her breath, leaning on her sister. We have our moments. Chapter 8. Into the Hive. The air in the upper caverns was thick with the acrid scent of crushed ant carcasses and the faint metallic tang of sweat and blood. Cain leaned against the jagged wall, his chest heaving as he tried to catch his breath. Around him, the others were doing the same, their faces etched with a mix of exhaustion and determination. This isn't over, Cain said, wiping his brow with the back of his hand. The dungeon's still stable. No tremors, no collapse. The Queen's still alive. Penny, crouched nearby and sharpening a pair of long daggers with quick, practiced strokes, didn't even look up. Figures. We've been stomping worker ants, maybe a warrior or two. But no collapse means we've missed the big bad, the queen. As Cain spoke, his eyes drifted to the carnage left in their wake, hundreds of ant corpses strewn across the cavern floor, many half-melted or shattered into grotesque, unrecognizable pieces. The aftermath of Bria's explosive poison fog was evident in the way the rocky surfaces glistened with a faint, caustic sheen. "Hell of a mess," Cain muttered, stepping gingerly around the remains. Tara surveyed the destruction, her sharp gaze taking in every detail. Messy, yes, but effective. She turned to Bria, a rare note of approval in her voice. "Your fog maneuver bought us this breather. Good work." That kind of precision could turn a run like this around. Bria's eyes widened slightly at the unexpected praise, and she straightened her posture. "Thank you," she said, her voice tinged with quiet pride. Penny gave her sister a sidelong glance, a faint smirk tugging at her lips. "Looks like you're finally earning your keep." Bria rolled her eyes, but didn't bother hiding the small, satisfied smile that crept onto her face. Tara turned her attention to the dark, sloping tunnel that yawned before them. "But we're not done. If you think the warriors were tough, get ready for the guardians. They're twice as big, twice as mean, and love tight spaces." Cain let out a low whistle, trying to mask his unease. "Great. I was just thinking this dungeon needed more giant, terrifying ants." She turned to the rest of the group, her tone shifting to something sharper, more commanding. "Listen up. Fighting in close quarters is a whole different game. No room to dodge, no room to swing wide." Penny's got the right idea. Penny looked up at the mention of her name, twirling one of her daggers. "Daggers are faster and deadlier in tight spaces. You don't need to stab deep, just hit the joints, the weak points." "Exactly," Tara said with a nod. "Bria, Lena, keep those shields tight. You'll need to protect not just yourselves, but anyone stuck in a bad position." Cain. Yeah, Cain interrupted, his lips curling into a faint grin. "No flailing around like I'm trying to swat flies. I'll keep it precise." She turned to him, her expression sharp. "No, you're not experienced enough for this yet, and all you have is that sword. You'll be best used holding a torch so we can all see what's going on. It'll be difficult enough as it is, add blind to it, and we could all go down." Cain opened his mouth to protest, but Tara cut him off. "Use your chains when you can, but otherwise, stay back and hold the torch high. That's an order." The group exchanged tight nods, the weight of the next phase settling over them. The tunnel loomed ahead, its shadowed maw beckoning like a predator. "All right," Tara said, drawing her blades. "Let's move. Watch your footing and stay sharp." As they descended into the darkness, Cain felt the cool, damp air close around them like a vice. His grip tightened on the torch in his hand. He felt naked and defenseless, but he was also well aware that someone had to do it, and he was the best one for the job. No room for mistakes, he muttered to himself, more a prayer than a promise. The tunnel sloped steeply, forcing the group into a single file line. The air grew heavier as they descended, thick with the scent of earth and something faintly sweet, almost sickly. Penny stopped abruptly, holding up a hand. "Give me a moment," she said, closing her eyes. Her daggers hung loosely at her sides as she stilled, her breathing evening out into a steady rhythm. Cain watched, confused, but before he could ask what she was doing, a wave of warmth swept over him. It wasn't physical, exactly, it was something deeper, a shift in his chest and mind. His racing thoughts stilled, replaced by a calm, unshakable certainty. His grip on the torch tightened as confidence swelled within him. Whatever was waiting in the shadows, they could handle it. "What was that?" Cain asked, glancing around at the others. Lena smiled, her shield shifting slightly as she adjusted her stance. "That was Penny. And that's only one of the reasons we'd follow her anywhere." "She calls it inspiration," Bria added, her tone light but reverent. "I call it the best edge you can ask for in a fight." Penny opened her eyes, her sharp gaze scanning the path ahead. "Let's move," she said, her voice steady and commanding. "Stay close. We've got this." The cavern walls pulsed faintly, almost imperceptibly, as though the dungeon itself were alive and breathing. Tiny rivulets of moisture trickled down the jagged stone, catching the torchlight and creating eerie, shifting patterns. "Ants always nest in layers," Tara explained from behind Penny, her voice carrying easily in the tight space. "Their colonies spiral downward, leading to key chambers. The queen's lair is always at the heart, surrounded by her strongest guardians. The egg nursery will be nearby. It's instinctual, a hierarchy that's as perfect as it is brutal." Ahead, a faint chittering sound echoed through the tunnel, growing louder with each passing moment. The first ant emerged from the gloom, a hulking warrior, its carapace gleaming black and mandibles snapping menacingly. "Contact," Penny announced, her tone calm but firm. "Formation now." Bria and Lena surged forward, their shields locking together seamlessly as the ant lunged. The impact sent a reverberation down the line, but the sisters held firm, their synchronized defense absorbing the brunt of the attack. "Grim, chains," Tara barked. Cain reacted instinctively, his spirit chains snapping out like ethereal vipers. The chain coiled around the ant's legs, yanking it off balance and leaving it thrashing on the ground. "Now!" Penny darted in with lethal precision, her daggers flashing as she targeted the joints in the creature's exoskeleton. Each strike was calculated, severing tendons and crippling its movement. Within seconds, the ant collapsed in a twitching heap. More chittering sounds echoed from the tunnel ahead, and Cain felt a chill run down his spine. "There's more coming." Penny didn't hesitate. "Hold this position." "Lena, Bria, stay defensive. Tara, you're with me. Grim, stay back and keep the torch steady." Another wave of ants poured into the tunnel, 3 this time, their movement swift and coordinated. Penny was a blur of motion, her daggers finding weak points with uncanny accuracy. Beside her, Tara struck with devastating force, her twin blades carving through the ants with surgical precision. "Focus the joints and underbelly," Penny called out as she ducked under a snapping mandible. Her voice carried authority, each command clear and decisive. Cain watched in awe as Penny moved like a whirlwind, her smaller stature allowing her to weave between the ants with ease. She flipped over one creature's back, driving both daggers into the soft spot behind its head in a single fluid motion. "Remind me never to get on her bad side," Cain muttered to himself, tightening his grip on the torch. As the last ant fell, Penny straightened, her breathing steady despite the exertion. She turned to the group, her gaze sharp. "Good work, but stay focused. This is only the beginning." Bria exchanged a quick glance with Lena, a faint smile playing at her lips. "She's scary when she's in the zone." "Scary is good," Lena replied, her tone approving. The group pressed on, the tunnel twisting and narrowing as they descended further. The chittering sounds grew more sporadic, fading into the distance as they neared their destination. Penny slowed, raising a hand to signal a halt. "We're close," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Be ready." The air grew warmer, heavier, and Cain felt a bead of sweat trickle down his temple. He adjusted his grip on the torch, its light barely cutting through the oppressive darkness. "No room for mistakes," he murmured again, his voice lost in the silence. The tunnel widened abruptly, opening into a cavern that glowed with an eerie, bioluminescent light. Translucent eggs, each the size of a small melon, lined the chamber walls in neat clusters, their surfaces pulsing faintly with a rhythmic glow. The air was humid, almost stifling, and carried a faintly sweet yet metallic tang. "Oh, jackpot," Penny said, her voice breaking the silence. She strode forward, her eyes scanning the rows of eggs with an almost predatory gleam. "This stuff's worth a fortune. Healing potions, magical reagents, you name it." Bria crouched by a cluster of eggs, running her fingers lightly over the surface of one. "How much are we talking?" "Enough to make this whole run, and a couple more totally worth it," Penny replied, already rummaging through her pack. Start dumping anything that can hold liquid. Water bottles, flasks, empty potion vials, whatever you've got. The group moved quickly, pouring out water and other less valuable supplies to make room for the egg fluid. Bria and Lena worked efficiently, while Tara stood watch near the entrance, her blades ready in case of an ambush. Cain, crouched near Penny, watched as she used a small knife to expertly pierce an egg, catching the viscous fluid as it spilled into a vial. "Careful," she warned. "This stuff's delicate. Don't spill a drop." "You're like a kid in a candy store," Cain said, smirking as he filled a flask with the glistening liquid. Penny shot him a glance. "And you're not? With this haul, you might finally be able to upgrade that junkyard relic you're obsessed with." "First of all," Cain began, his tone mock serious, "it's a classic. Show some respect for art in progress." He straightened, holding up a flask proudly. "Second, I wouldn't trade her for anything." Penny rolled her eyes. "You're hopeless." Nearby, Tara's sharp gaze scanned the chamber, her posture tense. "Cain," she said softly. Cain glanced over, frowning. "What is it?" Tara didn't respond immediately. Instead, she closed her eyes for a moment, a faint furrow appearing between her brows. Cain felt it then, a faint, almost imperceptible pull at the edge of his awareness. It was as if the air itself was laced with something off. "There are souls here," Tara said finally, her voice low. "3 of them. Close." Cain swallowed hard, gripping the torch tighter. "I can feel it too. It's like they're pulling away from me, but they can't." Bria glanced over, her brow furrowed. "We need the light over here." "Go," Tara replied quickly, her voice snapping back to its usual sharpness. "Focus on the eggs. We'll deal with it later." Cain hesitated, the strange sensation tugging at the back of his mind, but he nodded. Later, he murmured, forcing his attention back to the task at hand. The group worked in tense silence, the light-hearted mood from moments ago replaced by a creeping unease. As the last flask was filled and sealed, Penny straightened, surveying their haul with a satisfied grin. "This is enough to keep the guild afloat for months," she said. "Good work, everyone." Tara's eyes lingered on Cain for a moment, a silent reminder of the souls they couldn't yet address. "All right," Penny said, slinging her pack over her shoulder. "Let's move. The Queen's chamber won't wait forever." Cain nodded, though the faint, haunting tug of the souls stayed with him as they filed out of the egg chamber and back into the winding tunnels. With their containers full of the precious egg fluid, the group moved cautiously back into the winding tunnels. The glow of the egg chamber faded behind them, replaced by the oppressive darkness of the hive's deeper layers. The air was thick and humid, the faint, acrid tang of the hive becoming stronger as they descended further. "Stick close," Penny said, her voice low but steady. "We're getting close to the heart of the hive. Expect resistance." Cain adjusted his grip on the torch, the flickering light casting long shadows against the tunnel walls. His senses were on high alert, every echo and distant chitter setting his nerves on edge. "Smells worse down here," Cain muttered, wrinkling his nose. "That's the resin," Tara replied, keeping her gaze fixed ahead. "The hive secretes it to reinforce the walls and keep the Queen's chamber insulated. The stronger the scent, the closer we are." "And the ants?" Lena asked. "They'll be stronger too," Tara said grimly. The group moved in tense silence, their steps careful and deliberate. The hum of the hive grew louder, a low, resonant vibration that seemed to seep into Cain's chest. He glanced around at the others. Penny's daggers were drawn, her posture relaxed but alert. Lena and Bria held their shields at the ready, their synchronized movements steady and disciplined. Tara's twin blades glinted faintly in the torchlight, and her sharp eyes scanned the path ahead. As they rounded a corner, the tunnel began to widen, and the walls took on a slick, resinous sheen. The faint clicking of mandibles echoed from deeper within, growing louder with each step. Penny paused, raising a hand to halt the group. "This is it," she whispered. "The Queen's chamber is just ahead. Get ready." Cain felt it again, the strange, tugging sensation at the edge of his mind. It was faint but persistent, a presence trying to stay just out of reach. "Tara," he said quietly, his grip tightening on the torch. "I know," she replied without looking at him. "Later. Focus on the queen for now." The group pressed forward, the clicking sounds becoming a deafening chorus as they reached the edge of the chamber. Chapter 9. Uneasy Harvest. The tunnel opened into a massive cavern, its sheer size dwarfing everything they'd seen so far. At the center of the chamber lay the queen ant, an enormous, grotesque creature with a bulbous, pulsating abdomen. Her exoskeleton shimmered like black glass under the faint glow of bioluminescent moss clinging to the walls. The soft, eerie light illuminated the entire space, casting long shadows that danced with every movement. Cain glanced around, realizing the torch in his hand was no longer necessary. He let out a breath, tossing it aside as he drew his sword scythe and summoned his spirit chain. "Guess I'm finally off torch duty," he muttered, his grip tightening on the glowing weapon. Around the queen stood a ring of colossal guardian ants, their mandibles clicking ominously as they turned their glowing red eyes toward the intruders. "Stay sharp," Penny said, her voice barely above a whisper. "These guardians make the warriors look like house pets." The guardians moved in unison, their massive frames advancing with unnerving precision. "Here we go," Tara said, gripping her blades tightly. "Grim, take a flank. Lena, Bria, hold the line." Cain felt another jolt of inspiration from Penny, his muscles coiled with tension. He had a chance to prove himself, and this time, he wasn't going to waste it. The first guardian lunged, mandibles snapping with a sickening crunch. Lena and Bria braced themselves, their shields locking together just in time to absorb the impact. The force sent a shudder through the air, but they held firm, shoving the massive creature back a step. Cain darted to the left, his spirit chain flickering with spectral energy. "Let's see if I can pull this off," he muttered. With a burst of focus, he infused the chain with draining grasp, the weapon shimmering as it became ethereal. The guardian nearest him reared back, its mandibles wide. Cain swung his chain in a wide arc, the weapon slicing through the air like a living serpent. The glowing links passed through the guardian's body, their energy pulling its strength away. The massive creature staggered, its movement sluggish as Cain felt raw power surge into his own limbs. "Yes!" Cain shouted, exhilaration building as he swung again, catching two more guardians in the chain's sweeping arc. Each one faltered as the ethereal weapon passed through and drained their vitality, their once mighty forms collapsing under their own weight. "Don't stop," Tara yelled, dispatching another guardian with a clean strike to its head. Cain didn't need the reminder. The power flooding through him was intoxicating, making his movements faster and sharper. With a roar, he brought his long sword down on a weakened guardian, the weapon slicing through its carapace and splitting the creature in half. Green ichor splattered across the cavern floor as the ant crumpled. His instinct was to revel in the triumph, to cheer for the sheer strength coursing through his veins, but he forced himself to stay focused. "Not this time," he thought, gripping the chain tightly as he turned to face the next wave. Across the chamber, Bria blocked another guardian's charge, her shield trembling under the impact. Lena was beside her in an instant, slamming her own shield into the creature's side and forcing it back. "You good?" Lena asked, her voice tight with effort. Still standing, Bria replied, blood trickling from a fresh wound on her arm. Lena placed a glowing hand on Bria's injury, the wound knitting just enough to keep her in the fight. Penny darted through the chaos, her daggers flashing as she targeted the weak points in another guardian's exoskeleton. "We need to get to the queen," she called out, her strikes precise, but unable to do enough damage to end the fight quickly. The queen emitted a low, resonating hum, and the remaining guardians froze before surging forward in a desperate, erratic frenzy. "She's controlling them," Penny shouted, her movements becoming more frantic as the psychic influence made her limbs feel heavy. Cain felt the queen's mental pressure like a claw scraping at his skull, but he gritted his teeth and pushed through it. Focus her, he called out, his voice steadier than he felt. He turned his attention to the queen, his spirit chain flickering with renewed energy. Swinging it in another wide arc, he aimed to clear a path, draining the strength of any guardians in his way. Each swing made him stronger, his confidence growing as he pushed forward. Penny reached the queen first, her daggers striking at the soft joints beneath the massive creature's abdomen. "Cain, now," she yelled. With a surge of power, Cain changed the spirit chain into a second sword and plunged both into the queen's exposed side, the weapons cutting deep as one sharpened edge split the carapace and the other draining energy. The queen let out a final, deafening screech, her pulsating abdomen twitching violently before she collapsed. The remaining guardians froze for a moment before collapsing in unison, their psychic connection severed. The ground began to rumble, and Cain steadied himself, the glowing moss on the walls dimming. "It's starting," Tara said grimly. "The dungeon's collapsing." Penny wiped her daggers clean on a scrap of fabric from her pack, her breathing steady despite the intensity of the fight. "We've got some time. Let's regroup and move." Tara and Cain exchanged a glance, the unspoken weight of the souls they'd sensed earlier hanging between them. "Go ahead," Tara said to the group. "Cain and I will catch up after I give him a private lesson on how to maintain his demeanor during combat." The three women winced at once, not knowing how Tara would perform her private lesson, but not wanting anything to do with it. Penny nodded. "Don't go easy on him. If he can find his clarity, it seems like he may be useful in the future after all. Let's move." As the others headed toward the exit, Tara and Cain turned back toward the cavern, the faint echo of lost souls pulling at the edge of their senses. The echoes of the retreating group faded into the tunnels, leaving Tara and Cain alone in the cavern. The queen's massive corpse loomed nearby, its ichor pooling sluggishly on the uneven floor. The air was eerily still, save for the faint hum of energy that Cain could now clearly feel, a subtle pull that made the hairs on his neck stand on end. Tara turned to him, her expression unreadable. "You feel it, don't you?" Cain nodded hesitantly. "Yeah, it's a pressure, the same as in the egg chamber." "It's the souls," Tara explained. "They're stuck here, trapped between this place, this other reality, and our own worlds in between. It's our job to send them back." Cain's discomfort deepened. "Stuck how?" Tara stepped forward, raising her hand slightly as if feeling for something invisible. "Dungeons like this don't just trap the living. They snag souls too. People who die here can never move on. Some are fresh, they hardly know they're gone. Others, they've been stuck for so long they've forgotten what it's like to be whole. The longer they're here, the harder it is to pull them back." Cain shivered. "And what happens if we don't pull them back?" Tara paused, her gaze lingering on the faint ripples in the air. "I don't know," she admitted, her voice quieter than usual. "But it goes against the true laws of our universe. Whatever this place is, these dungeons, not even death itself can reach them. The primeval entity that has sheltered every dead soul since the beginning of time doesn't have the power to stop this." Cain stared at her, the weight of her words pressing down like a stone in his chest. Tara straightened, her expression hardening. "Isn't that alone enough to show something's wrong?" "That something has to set things right? That's us, Cain. We're here to set things right." She crouched near the queen's corpse and closed her eyes, her hand hovering over the ground. "Watch." Cain did as she instructed, his unease growing as the air seemed to ripple around Tara's outstretched hand. A low moan echoed faintly through the cavern, sending chills racing down his spine. The moan grew louder, more guttural, as a faint, translucent figure began to materialize above the queen's body. Its shape was humanoid but distorted, its edges flickering and uneven. The soul's hands clawed desperately at the air, its silent cries of resistance almost audible now. Cain's breath caught in his throat. "It's fighting." "They always fight," Tara said softly, her focus unbroken. "The longer they're trapped, the harder they fight. Some scream, some beg, but they have to go back. It's where they belong." The soul's form became more solid, its features warped in anguish as it tried to pull away from Tara's invisible grip. She reached out, her hand passing through its chest. The soul let out a final, haunting wail as it collapsed into her palm, disappearing in a faint burst of light. Tara exhaled slowly, lowering her hand. She turned to Cain, her expression steady but weary. "That's how it's done. Your turn." Cain stared at the empty space where the soul had been. Where did it go?" "Back to our in-between," Tara replied. "That's where it belongs. That's where we all belong, eventually." Cain hesitated, his hand twitching slightly. "It didn't want to go." "They never do," she said evenly. "This is the job, Grim. The souls need to go home, whether they want to or not." Cain swallowed hard, the weight of Tara's words pressing down on him like a lead blanket. He nodded, his hand trembling slightly as he stepped forward. The ripple in the air seemed to thrum with an energy that tugged at the edge of his mind, faint but insistent. He reached out tentatively, focusing on the pull. At first, nothing happened. Then the ripple stirred, warping the space around it as a figure began to take shape. The soul emerged with a jarring intensity, its translucent form coalescing in fits and starts, like smoke forced into a fragile mold. Its moans were guttural and raw, but there was no mouth, no voice, just sound pouring from its very essence. As its shape solidified, the soul thrashed violently, its claw-like hands swiping at the air, trying to tear itself free of Cain's pull. Cain gritted his teeth, his hand trembling as he tried to hold onto it. But the soul fought harder. Its presence slammed into him, not with words, but with raw emotion, a surge of fury and defiance that clawed at his own spirit. His chest tightened as the rage consumed him, its feelings spilling into his own like ink spreading through water. It hated him. It hated the pull, the force that was dragging it back to the place it had escaped. Cain could feel its anger, its burning resentment, as though it were alive and screaming inside his chest. He faltered, taking a shaky step back, but Tara's sharp voice cut through the haze. "Don't stop. Focus. Pull it back." The soul shifted, its rage giving way to something sharper, more personal. Cain felt a flash of pain, of fire and knives tearing through him, not his pain, but the soul's. It hurled images and sensations at him, an onslaught of terror and suffering meant to overwhelm his will. It wasn't just resisting. It was threatening him. The flashes became more vivid. A suffocating darkness. The sensation of drowning. Bones breaking. A relentless, suffocating fear that clawed at the edges of his sanity. Cain clenched his jaw, forcing himself to push through. The soul's anger twisted into desperation. The hatred dissolved into a pitiful, aching plea. It stopped fighting, its movement slowing as it hovered just out of reach. The begging came next. It was a keening, mournful wail that wasn't sound but feeling. "Please, don't send me back. Let me be free. Please. I've suffered enough." The desperation clawed at him, made him hesitate for the briefest moment. But he didn't stop. The soul shuddered, its form flickering as though it might vanish entirely. Cain pulled harder, his focus unwavering. The soul let out one final, heart-wrenching cry before it went still, its defiance and pleas extinguished in the weight of its exhaustion. Cain felt it then, a connection deep within him. The in-between stirred in his mind, its dulled colors and oppressive stillness flooding his senses. It wasn't just a memory. It was part of him, a place that lived inside his very essence. This is where the soul belonged. With a steadying breath, Cain gave the faintest nudge, his will guiding the lost soul toward that place. The ripples around it stilled, and the soul collapsed into his palm, disappearing in a soft pulse of light. "That's it," Tara said softly, her voice breaking the silence. "You sent it home." Cain turned to her, his expression conflicted. "It begged me. It didn't want to go." For a moment, he stood frozen, his chest heaving. The cavern felt too small, the air too thin, as his mind wrestled with what he had just done. The world around him rushed back, sharper and brighter than before. A wave of euphoria surged through him, filling every inch of his body with warmth and power. It was intoxicating, like a rush of pure life energy coursing through his veins. Cain clenched his fists, feeling the power coursing through him. Suddenly, it no longer mattered how he felt. He had a purpose now. The sensation hit Cain like a bolt of lightning. A rush of energy surged through him, raw and overwhelming. The energy settled, a warm, intoxicating sensation that pulsed through his veins. He felt stronger, sharper, his mind clearer than it had been in days. This energy needed to go somewhere, and he could do with it whatever he wanted. It could make him stronger, faster, tougher. Instinctively, he channeled the power toward his magic core, feeling his connection to his abilities deepen. Cain staggered slightly, his breathing ragged. That was intense. Tara watched him closely, a faint smile tugging at the corner of her lips. It always is. But you handled it. Not bad for your first try. Cain straightened, his expression conflicted. I don't know if I'm ready to say this feels right. It's not about right or wrong, Tara said, turning toward the egg chamber. It's about doing what needs to be done. The souls have to go back. That's the way it's supposed to be. The faint glow of the egg chamber greeted them as they retraced their steps, its pulsing light now almost comforting compared to the chaos of the Queen's lair. The eerie stillness of the room pressed in around them, but Cain felt something else, a faint tug in the air, familiar now after his first reaping. They're here, Tara said quietly, her eyes scanning the chamber. Cain nodded, the sensation sharper this time. 3 of them. Tara moved to the center of the room, the soft crunch of her boots on the resin-coated floor the only sound. I'll take the first one. Watch closely, you'll need to handle the rest. Cain stood back, his pulse quickening as Tara raised her hand. Her focus was immediate, her presence commanding as she drew the first soul from the air. It appeared with less resistance than the one in the Queen's chamber, its translucent form rippling like water disturbed by a gentle breeze. The soul's faint wail was cut short as Tara reached out, her hand passing through its chest. The motion was fluid, efficient, and almost kind. The soul dissolved into her palm without a struggle, the ripple of its passing fading as quickly as it came. Tara turned to Cain, her expression calm but expectant. Your turn. You know how it feels now. Trust that. Cain stepped forward, the pull of the remaining souls almost guiding his movements. His hand trembled as he reached out, but this time the soul emerged faster, its form more defined. It struggled weakly, its resistance faint compared to the one before. The connection to the in-between came easier now. Cain felt its stillness, its muted presence, and with a steadying breath, he guided the soul back. The rush of power that followed was just as intoxicating as before, though this time it felt easier, more natural. He flexed his fingers, the surge of energy settling into him like a second heartbeat. All right, he murmured, turning toward the third soul. One more. This one fought harder, its form thrashing as it clawed at the air. Cain gritted his teeth, his focus unwavering as he pulled it closer. The cries of desperation and fear echoed in his mind, but they were muted now, drowned out by the growing confidence in his abilities. When the final soul collapsed into his hand, the euphoria surged through him like a tidal wave, undeniable and all-encompassing. But this time, Cain understood it for what it was: death's reward. This was how a reaper grew stronger, how their connection to the in-between fueled their very existence. The sensation wasn't just intoxicating, it was purposeful. Cain could feel the energy coursing through him, raw and malleable, waiting to be directed. He closed his eyes, focusing inward. The future he envisioned for himself became clearer in that moment, a path of mastery, of wielding power with precision and purpose. He guided the energy toward his magic, feeling it flow into his core like water filling a vessel. His solar plexus seemed to hum, the sensation vivid and tangible. It was as if the small glass inside him, once half full, now held just a little more. Cain didn't need to check his aid stats to know the result. The connection was too natural, too instinctive. His magic prowess had climbed to 59, and the strength of that realization sent a small shiver of satisfaction through him. He exhaled slowly, steadying himself as the lingering rush began to fade. This wasn't just about power, it was about potential, about the choices he now knew he could make. And for the first time, Cain felt like he wasn't just fumbling in the dark. He was learning to grow. Tara watched him carefully, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "You're starting to get it," she said, her tone somewhere between approval and caution. Cain nodded, his chest rising and falling with steady breaths. "I don't know if I'll ever be comfortable with this, but I can't deny, it feels right." "Good," Tara replied, turning toward the tunnel. "Hold on to that. Let's go." The tunnel felt longer on the way back, the rumbling beneath their feet a constant reminder of the dungeon's slow collapse. When they finally reached the gate, the rest of the group was already waiting, their expressions shifting to relief as Tara and Cain emerged. "Thought you got lost in there, Grim," Penny said, her smirk a mix of teasing and genuine concern. Cain rolled his shoulders, feigning nonchalance. "Just cataloging more reasons to avoid ants. Add colossal queens and dog-sized guardians to the list." Lena chuckled, Bria giving him a weary thumbs up as she leaned against her sister. Penny's gaze lingered on Cain for a moment before she turned toward the gate. "All right, let's get out of here. This place gives me the creeps." The group stepped through the shimmering blue portal one by one, the faint hum of the collapsing dungeon growing fainter behind them. As Cain stepped through, he paused, glancing back at the fading cavern. His grip on his spirit chain tightened slightly as a quiet resolve settled over him. The last time he'd entered a dungeon, he hadn't come back alive. This time, he hadn't just survived. He was growing. With a steady breath, he stepped through the gate, the sensation of the dungeon fading away as he rejoined his team on the other side. Chapter 10. Grim Adjustments. The Hollow Blade HQ was even more of an eyesore in the light of day. The cracked windows and mismatched brickwork gave the impression of a place that had survived one apocalypse and was barely holding out against another. Cain followed Penny inside, his boots echoing on the warped wooden floor. "Home sweet home," Penny said, glancing back at him. Or something like that. The group dispersed quickly, Lena and Bria toward what passed for a kitchen, and Tara to some dark corner where she could probably sharpen her weapons in peace. Penny led Cain down a side hallway. "You did good out there," she said over her shoulder. "Better than I expected, honestly. Still, you've got a lot to learn." They stopped in front of a door that looked sturdier than the others, as if it had been reinforced against whatever chaos might spill into the rest of the building. Penny pushed it open, revealing a room that was startlingly pristine compared to the rest of the HQ. Bookshelves lined the walls, packed with worn manuals, dungeon guides, and thick, leather-bound notebooks. A few tables and chairs sat in the center, their surfaces cluttered with maps and loose papers. "This," Penny said, gesturing grandly, "is where the magic happens." "Looks like where a librarian's nightmares happen," Cain muttered, eyeing the stacks of paper teetering on the edges of the tables. Penny smirked. "Maybe, but this is also where you'll get caught up on everything you should already know." Cain's stomach sank. "You're not serious. Ever heard of the digital age?" "Completely serious, and people learn better when they can physically read a book. Trust me, there's science behind it." She patted him on the shoulder. "Take today off. You earned it. But tomorrow? Bright and early. Diligent study." Cain groaned, running a hand through his hair. "This is cruel and unusual punishment. I'll be out with the sisters getting the best price for our haul. You'll have the place to yourself for a while," Penny said cheerfully as she turned and headed for the door. "Enjoy your day off, Grim. You'll need it." Cain sprawled on a battered couch in the common area, a beat-up laptop balanced on his knees. He had planned to relax, maybe zone out with some mindless videos, but his thoughts kept drifting back to one thing, the scythe. His sword, Maria's gift, with the word scythe engraved along the blade, had been a lifesaver in the dungeon. But it wasn't the weapon Cain truly wanted. Every swing, every block, felt like a betrayal of the image he was trying to build for himself. The scythe was more than just a weapon to him, it was an aesthetic, a persona, a part of the Reaper he was trying to become. The thought of giving up on it, of resigning himself to being just another sword-swinging adventurer, made his teeth clench. "No way," Cain muttered, typing furiously into the search bar. "If I'm going to do this, I'm doing it right." A search query led him down an internet rabbit hole, and before long, he was watching a grainy video of someone demonstrating Ryukyu Kempo, a martial arts style from Okinawa. The instructor wielded a pair of short sickles with wickedly sharp blades, moving with a grace and precision that made Cain sit up straighter. The video cut to an explanation of the style's origins. Cain clicked play, leaning closer as the narrator spoke. Okinawan martial artists adapted Ryukyu Kempo from traditional farming tools, like sickles and staffs, during a time when commoners were forbidden to own weapons. Necessity drove innovation, and they turned the tools of their labor into tools of survival. Cain watched, transfixed, as the video showed practitioners demonstrating techniques with bow staffs, and other weapons. The movements were fluid but lethal, designed for efficiency. He paused the video, leaning back against the couch. "Okay, that's badass." The screen autoplayed another video, this time focusing on a martial arts dojo an hour and a half away from the city. The instructor, an older man with a grizzled face and a soft smile, spoke about how the principles of Ryukyu Kempo could be applied to modern weapons and techniques. Cain's mind raced. The scythe wasn't exactly a but the principles were the same, turning a tool into a weapon, adapting and refining it for combat. He felt a flicker of hope. Maybe this was the answer. Then the practicalities hit him. "Right," Cain muttered, clicking off the video. "No car. No time. Awesome." He let the laptop fall closed and rubbed his temples. Fixing up the battle wagon had to wait, but without transportation, getting to the dojo was impossible. Still, the seed was planted. The thought of mastering his spirit scythe, of moving with the same lethal grace as the martial artists in the videos, lit a spark of determination in him. The HQ was quiet as Cain stretched out on the battered couch, the borrowed laptop resting on the floor beside him. The screen had gone dark after hours of research, and his mind buzzed with fragments of martial arts techniques and dojo possibilities. But now, something else buzzed beneath his skin. The sensation started as a faint hum, a vibration he couldn't quite place. At first, he thought it was fatigue, the side effect of too much caffeine and too little sleep. But the feeling grew stronger, sharper, pulling at his chest like an invisible tether. Cain sat up, his breath catching. What the hell? It wasn't painful, but it was insistent, like a hand reaching into his ribcage and yanking him towards some unseen destination. He instinctively knew what it meant. Somehow, the in-between was calling him. The pull grew stronger, almost urgent, as if a timer were ticking down inside him. He glanced at the time on his aid, a little after 5 p.m. "I guess this isn't a request," Cain muttered, rubbing the back of his neck. Not knowing what else to do, he grabbed his coat and headed for the parking lot. The air was crisp and still as he climbed into his rusted metro car, reclining the driver's seat as far back as it would go. "If I'm getting dragged off, might as well be comfortable," he mumbled, pulling his jacket tighter. The tug intensified as his eyelids grew heavier. His last conscious thought was how the sensation wasn't entirely unpleasant, more like falling, as though the world was tilting beneath him. And then he landed. Cain blinked, disoriented as his surroundings snapped into focus. He was seated in a booth, the faint hum of a coffee machine and the clatter of distant dishes grounding him in a surreal sense of normalcy. The table in front of him held a mug of coffee, its contents lukewarm and watery, steam barely rising from the surface. The mug itself was black and silver, with the word Grim emblazoned across the front next to a small scythe emblem. Across from him sat Tobias, his massive arms crossed as he leaned back in the booth. His presence filled the space, his piercing gaze landing on Cain with an almost fatherly mixture of approval and exasperation. "Right on time," Tobias rumbled, gesturing at the coffee mug. "Your coffee was getting cold. It's your initiation gift." Cain stared at the mug, his fingers brushing over the smooth surface. The scythe emblem gleamed faintly in the cafe's muted light, and the word grim felt oddly reassuring as it stared back at him. He looked up at Tobias, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. Thanks, Tobias. Really. For the mug, for backing me up out there, for all of it. Tobias grunted, leaning back in the booth. You're a Reaper now, kid. Gotta start acting like it. If it takes you looking like one to do the job right, then I'm all for it. Don't get me wrong, it's still goofy as fuck all, but who am I to judge what we choose to be? Cain chuckled softly, thinking about the hot blonde with the commanding attitude. He still had problems relating that picture to this mountain across the table. He lifted the coffee for a sip. It was as bad as it looked, lukewarm and watery, but the gesture behind it made it taste better than anything he'd had in days. Before he could say more, Shaniqua slid into the booth with her usual flair. Well. If it isn't our newbie Reaper, Shaniqua said, sliding into the booth next to Tobias. She glanced at the mug and smirked. Nice branding. You're really going to settle into the whole Grim Reaper shtick. She leaned back, rolling her eyes. You know what? I don't even care. Let's hear it. How'd the dungeon go? Cain hesitated, glancing at Tobias. The hulking man shrugged. It's your report, kid. Might as well get used to making them. With a sigh, Cain recounted the events of the dungeon, his struggles, his mistakes, and the moments of clarity when he felt like he was finally getting the hang of being a Reaper. Tobias added the occasional note, his tone gruff but not unkind. The cafe seemed to shift slightly as Maria and Edgar took seats at nearby tables. Maria kicked her legs up onto the seat opposite her, her posture relaxed, while Edgar sat with the kind of stiff formality that suggested he'd rather be anywhere else. Perfect timing, Shaniqua said, folding her hands on the table and eyeing Cain. He suppressed a groan, raising his grim mug for another sip of the watery coffee. It tasted no better the second time. I heard you survived, Edgar said, his voice dry as sandpaper. Barely. Thanks for the vote of confidence, and also, thanks for sending me that tip on my abilities. You are truly a master tactician, Cain replied, setting the mug down. Edgar gave him a nod, his expression softening slightly. If you need me to help with synergy in the future, let me know. I'm happy to assist. It only makes our job easier when you know what you're doing. Cain turned toward Maria and grinned. And thank you for the sword. It was spectacular. Maria waved a hand dismissively. That old thing? It was just lying around. Shaniqua lifted her eyebrows in surprise. You got a sword from Clover? Impressive. Cain sat up a little straighter, his eyes widening. Your Clover? The world-famous weaponsmith Clover. Maria smirked, leaning back. The one and only. I have a Clover, Cain said, nodding to himself. That is impressive. Edgar snorted, leaning slightly toward Tobias. So I gave him a killer power combo, Maria gave him a sword worth who knows how much, and Tobias here got him a coffee mug and probably let the kid look at her ass all day, which is worth a lot, I might add. He gave Tobias a wink. Tobias gave a cheesy smile, muttering, damn right it is. Edgar turned his attention to Shaniqua. What did you give him, oh great supervisor, leaning into his Chinese accent. Shaniqua grinned, her expression mischievous. I made his dreams come true. I made his actual name Cain, so now I'll call him Cain and not Keith. He can stop bothering everyone about it. Cain raised his mug. Call me Grim now. Shaniqua rolled her eyes dramatically. Not in a million fucking years, Cain. With that, Shaniqua clapped her hands sharply, the sound cutting through the laughter. All right, fun's over. Time to get serious. She looked at Tobias, her tone losing its usual humor. Because Tobias was forced into servitude with the hollow blades to compensate for Cain's lack of preparation, Maria will need to take on some of the Class C dungeons Tobias would normally handle. Maria groaned, throwing her head back dramatically. Seriously? That's not fair. How long is this going to last? Shaniqua glanced at Tobias. A month, was it? Tobias nodded, unfortunately. And, Shaniqua added, her gaze shifting to Edgar, you'll be taking on some of the Class B dungeons. Edgar's eyes narrowed. You're kidding. I never kid, Shaniqua said. At least not about dungeon assignments. Both Maria and Edgar turned their attention to Cain, their expressions varying degrees of displeasure. This is your fault, Grim, Maria said flatly. Cain held up his hands in mock surrender. Hey, I didn't ask for any of this. You could have at least asked for more prep time, Edgar snapped. Or not gotten Tobias involved in the first place, Maria added. Cain sighed, raising his mug in mock toast. To being everyone's favorite scapegoat. Cheers. Tobias snorted, the corner of his mouth twitching upward in the faintest hint of a smirk. Cain blinked awake, sunlight streaming through the windshield of his car. He groaned, shifting in the driver's seat as his mind struggled to piece together how he got there. The world outside was warm and quiet, with morning commuters just beginning to trickle into the streets. He wasn't sure if he had actually slept or if time had done its usual weird in-between thing. Every time he left that place, the Reaper's in-between, it felt like his body hit some kind of reset button. Either way, he felt amazing. Better than I have any right to, he muttered to himself, flexing his hands and rolling his shoulders. He should be unable to walk after everything that went down in the dungeon, but instead, he felt good as new. Better than new, actually. His stomach growled angrily, breaking the moment. All right. Food first, existential dread later. Sliding out of the car, he stretched and made his way toward HQ. The familiar building loomed ahead, its mismatched architecture somehow managing to look both imposing and perpetually unfinished. Stepping inside, he was greeted by the unmistakable chaos of Penny already hard at work. Time to hit the books, kid. Penny's voice rang out the second she spotted him. She didn't look up from the stack of papers she was furiously scribbling notes onto. I rearranged the study just for you. Take a section at a time. Cain stared at her, still trying to shake the remnants of sleep, or whatever passed for sleep. Good morning to you too, Penny. Penny ignored him, waving a pen toward the hallway leading to the study. Start with the histories in section 1. Then, you'll move through each other section every day for a month. Got it? Cain groaned in the affirmative, his stomach growling again as if protesting the idea. We hit the motherlode on that dungeon, Penny continued, finally looking up with an annoyingly chipper smile. Might even finally get these windows fixed. She gestured dramatically to the cracked glass behind her desk, which had apparently been a problem long enough to become part of the HQ's charm. Cain raised an eyebrow. Glad to see you're making the best of it. Any other surprises? Actually, yeah. Penny reached into a drawer and pulled out a sleek silver card, tossing it to him. He caught it, turning it over to see the broad logo gleaming on the surface. I loaded some pay on your account. Use your aid to activate it. Cain blinked, looking at the card. Pay? Already? Is this, like, normal or? Don't expect nearly that much every time, Penny interrupted, smirking. This was definitely an anomaly. But hey, nice first day. Cain's stomach growled again as he stared at the card. Guess I can eat something better than vending machine sandwiches now. Also, Penny added with a sly grin, don't spend it all in one place. And by that, I mean do spend it all in one place. I want your trash car out of the back lot ASAP. Cain froze mid-step, narrowing his eyes. My car. Penny leaned back, her grin widening. Yeah. Consider it a bonus for a good first day. Cain couldn't help but laugh. You're serious? I get my car now. Drive something that doesn't embarrass the rest of us, and we'll call it even, Penny said, already returning to her notes. Now get moving. Those books aren't going to read themselves. Cain started toward the study, shaking his head with a bemused grin. As he passed the doorway, Penny called after him one more time. Oh, by the way, she said, her tone more formal. I made it official with the Dungeon Regulation and Oversight Bureau. Welcome to the Hollow Blade, Grim. Cain kept walking, raising a casual thumbs up behind him like it was no big deal. But as he disappeared into the study, a huge smile spread across his face.